Okay, hello everybody. How's everybody doing? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Give me a yes or no or whatever.
Yes.
You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Okay, I'm going to assume that you can. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I apologize for the late sending of the Zoom link. We were not sure until earlier this afternoon what room we'd actually be using for the Zoom link for the fast track class. And then I got stuck in some traffic getting back over here, so I just couldn't do anything about it. So I apologize, but it should be the same Zoom link every time. I set it up as a recurring meeting, so it should be the same connection every single time. So we'll go ahead and get started. I think we might be missing a couple of people here, but if and possibly it's because I got the link out so late, but that's not going to be a serious problem because I think we should be okay. And I apologize if I'm leaving the field of view here a little bit. I'm just trying to get some of my material set up here. So we'll go ahead and get started. And I think everybody knows everybody. So I won't go through the usual exercise of introductions, but other than to talk about myself. My name is Tim Simpson, and I've been teaching econ for about 28 years, and I've been at CNF for about 16 years. And I've been in the fast track, teaching the fast track program really since the very beginning, since the very first cohort. I think we're into, I think you guys are 14, aren't you? Cohort 14? No, sure. So I probably had more than half, probably 8 or 9 or 10, something like that, of the cohorts. So I've taught most of them. And so I'm very familiar with what the program is all about. And more importantly, how it sort of fits together with the rest of the curriculum as the whole thing unfolds toward a degree program. So now obviously the Zoom platform, this is, I think, only about the second, I guess maybe the third that we've done since the COVID began with pure, well, maybe it's, I guess, the fourth cohort that we've done, just purely Zoom links. In fact, I was really unsure whether or not we were going to do a Zoom connection today or we were really going to do it in class. But since you guys have started, I think you've been together throughout the entirety of COVID, you've always done Zoom links, so it probably would be too disruptive to have everybody come into the central location. But that's typically when the program started, everybody would come in at 5:30 and originally about 5, and usually they have dinner and about 4:35, and then we'd meet until 8:20, physically meet, usually downtown. Then we moved it to the training center up on the north side. So anyway, but this will be purely in Zoom. I am not sure whether or not this is all going to be recorded. We've got a certain limited amount of space for cloud memory, and every faculty member has only got a certain amount. So hopefully everybody here is going to get this all live, and that's really the intent of the program in the first place, was to start out with the live. Was to have this as a live event. So anyway, let me go ahead. I think the first thing I want to do here is to talk about the syllabus and just kind of go over what to expect for the class. The format of this syllabus may be just a little bit different. It's going to change next semester once the econ department is moving over to the business school, and so we'll be in a standardized syllabus. So this looks a little bit more like the liberal arts format, which is where we are housed right now. And I'll talk a bit more about this division and what that might mean, but nonetheless, it should contain all the details regarding what we're going to be doing for the next 7 weeks. And so let me pull it up here if I can. So there's my contact information on the first page, and you can see it there. Also, I included in the first week's module 3.7 to 3.13, which you can get to through coursework content. I included a PowerPoint presentation which should track along with what I'm doing in class today. It kind of came in, I viewed it, it kind of looks like it replicated itself, it kind of doubled. We had this problem in one of my sections last semester. I'm not quite sure what that's due to. I'm going to have to look into that. I went ahead and posted it just that you've got it, even though it's really distracting to look at. DL had a look at it last time. DL, that is distance learning, our distance learning department, had a look at it last time, trying to figure it out, and they didn't have any solutions. And so, and it was only for, just that one section. So I thought, well, maybe it's just, I don't know, something weird going on in the programming, but this appears to be something more systemic. So I will try to figure that out for you. And if worst comes to worst, then what I may do is I may just simply email you the PowerPoint presentation. I do want you to have that as we kind of go through that. I know that sometimes people have the idea that the PowerPoints are a little bit more valuable than what they are. I guess in my mind, the PowerPoints are good in the sense that they sort of allow you to sort of follow along with the class presentation, so that you know what I'm talking about, where I am, if I mention something, and you know, where does this sort of fall within the scheme of things. You can sort of organize it. As a study aid for the exams and quizzes, I'm not sure that it's going to be all that helpful, but you know, use it as you like, and you know, get whatever kind of benefit out of it that you think. Okay. So my office hours, and since this is a brand new section, and by the way, this is also the first fast track course that I've ever had on a Monday, and so in working this, I was a little bit unsure, frankly, because it's usually on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I know the fast track methodology is that assignments and everything are due like the day before the class meets. Well, the day before the class meets is obviously, you know, that would have been yesterday, and obviously that we can't have anything to do. But I don't have any quiz activity to do this week. In fact, the only real activity that I would like for everybody to sort of engage in is reading and just sort of getting into the material, reading. That's probably the big thing for this week. You know, and but in terms of like due dates and whatnot, I've made these like on the Sunday, because we do, which is the day before, but it's the Sunday that would follow the week of the material that we'll be covering, which I think is a little bit more logical. And I hope that makes sense for everybody. I hope that works. I don't know what the reasons are. Maybe somebody can enlighten me, but I know that Rochelle, who's our associate dean, they contacted me some time ago and said, hey, we're gonna have to move this to Monday. Is that gonna be okay with you? I said, well, yeah, it's fine. I didn't really catch the reasons why, but I didn't realize until as I was working on this over the weekend that it's going to be a due date. It's going to fall earlier in the week. And so hopefully this won't represent a problem. If it does represent a problem, there's something I'm not thinking of here, something I'm missing, let me know and we can revise it. I can always change the syllabus around and make some changes if I need to. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal. It should work for you. I'm going to try to make the quizzes available all week long for that week in which they're available. And the exams will be available for like a 4-day stretch. So you should have ample time to work on those. I know that you have another class that you're doing at the same time as you're doing this. And I know that most of you work and have other responsibilities. And so believe me, I know you guys are busy, and I know your time is valuable. I don't want to, you know, throw up unnecessary roadblocks. And so if there's something that I'm not seeing here with regard to this due date being the due day before class, then let me know. We'll talk about the discussions and what that activity is all about there. I'm trying to make that as lenient, as flexible as possible as well. So if you look on the syllabus, and I don't want to spend a great deal of time on this, but I do want to sort of go over this so everyone's familiar with what's going on. I've intended for my office hours to be right before this class begins. And so I'm here anyway on Mondays and Wednesdays in the afternoon. And so where I'm recording this is in Max Salazar Hall on main campus. Usually we do it from Smith Brasher in a business school, but I've already got this room on Mondays, and so I asked whether or not I could keep it. And so and my office is right upstairs. So in fact, it's like right directly above me. So I'm here, and so if you need to see me, and I think it's office 34. I can't remember offhand, but if you physically want to come talk to me, that's fine. There's no mask provisions anymore for coming on campus. The school does require that everyone be vaccinated and to show proof of that, or to have some valid reason why not, and then you have to be tested once per week. But barring that, and I know all of us have had all of our shots and whatnot, but if you want to see me physically, it's on the 5th floor in Max Salazar. It's the big building on the east side of University, and which was just been remodeled, and I'm on the 5th floor, and there'll be a receptionist there that will direct you where to go. So I'll try to be there in the afternoons prior to class. And if I'm not there, I'll be down here in this classroom just trying to get things set up. I was just a little bit behind in getting going today. just because I had to run out and I didn't realize I would get stuck in a traffic jam. So that is on me, and I apologize. I'll try not to let that happen again. And in fact, I wouldn't have thought that would have happened given the fact that I was already here. Actually, I just had to run out for a brief time period. So my office hours are going to be right before class. That is my telephone extension is 50689. I'm going to go ahead and give you my cell phone number, and so you can call me on that or text me, whichever you prefer. So my cell is 505-977-4632. I know some instructors think it's crazy to give out their cell numbers, but I have been giving mine to students forever, and it's never been a problem. I know people start calling me at 4 in the morning, then I guess maybe I'll say it's a problem, but so far nobody's done that. So feel free to get with me on that. That might be a good way to get a hold of me, or you can email me tsimpson11@cnm.edu. However you want to get with me is fine. I mean, we've got multiple avenues to reach me. There's also questions link under on the Brightspace page, content discussions, and there's a questions link, and you can post your note. If you do post a note there, just make sure it's not something that's personal and confidential to yourself, because it's a public forum, so anybody can see it. So sometimes people ask a question about a grade or whatever, and I'll say, check your email, because I will respond to there. So I'm usually pretty mindful of that, so I just ask you to be aware of that. You can feel free to call me on my extension. By the way, if you send me a voicemail through the 50689 extension, it's going to go to my email anyway, which is kind of weird. So however you want to get with me is fine. Just let me know who it is and give you a number to call back if you have to leave a message, and I'll get with you. The text is the McConnell text. Hopefully everyone's got it. Did everybody get that okay? Everyone got the text? Yes, or maybe raise your hand or something. Because I can see you and I can hear you as well. If,
no, I didn't get it.
You did not get your text?
No.
Okay. Did anybody get the text for the class?
Is
No
that
one's
the
got
book?
the text yet. Okay.
You're talking about the book?
Oh, that's a
The
problem.
Red Shelf book?
Okay, I'll have to follow up on that.
Wait. Are you talking
Do you
about
mean
the
a
book?
book or a text
Are
message?
you talking about the
Oh,
book?
you know what? I can't hear you.
Oh.
Shoot. Type something in the chat box if you would. There's something wrong with the audio, the incoming audio on this. You can hear me, but I can't hear you, and I don't know why that is. And I am. I don't know what the procedure is on that. I'm sort of out of the loop when it comes to that. What does it say here? Let me see. Yes, the book, the textbook. Yes, the textbook. Did anybody get the textbook? Textbook. You got it. Okay. All right. Text. What did you think I was saying? Okay. Yeah, but it was the textbook. Yes, it's the McConnell textbook. And there are different ways. Okay. So if you did not get the text, and I was having a heart attack there when you said you did not get it, because I was thinking, oh my God, because this is really this first week, I really just wanted everybody to read, just to kind of get into the material and just get a sort of a jump start, get their feet wet with it. But I'm glad if most of you got. If you did not get it, get with me. I don't know why I can't hear you. I know that sometimes I replay my videos and I can't hear it. There's something that somebody did to the computer. I've got to find out what's going on, and I apologize, because we've got these microphones here that hang from the ceiling that pick up my voice, and it should. I should be able to hear you. And I used to, but somebody did something, and I don't know what is going on there. So I apologize. That really is not good for a class like this, where it's supposed to be very interactive. And I tried to, let me see if I can play around with this a little bit. Maybe I will during the break here, but shoot, that's a real problem. So anyway, so if you do not get the textbook, let me know individually. We'll find out. I know that I'm sort of out of the loop as to what that whole procedure is, but the book is the McConnell text, McConnell, Brew, and Flynn. We've been using it for quite a long time. I think it's a really good macro text. I think it covers a lot of the highlights of what is important to talk about in an introductory course. And so I think it's a good one to look at, and it's a good one to use. And so for the first week, you notice it's mostly just reading. There is a discussion activity that I've that I've prepared, and that's available in the Brightspace site. And so if you look on the syllabus, I've scrolled down to the second page here where under section 5, where it talks about course requirements and attendance. So we've got 2 exams in the course, and I think they come up in weeks 4 and 7. So there are only 2 exams, and then there are 4 quizzes. And those are all going to be done in Brightspace. So those used to be, excuse me, those used to be done in class when we met as a group. But given the fact that we are doing this remotely now, they'll be done in Brightspace. And those will be available. They should be available for you to work. The quizzes will be available all week for you to work. Now, there's no quiz due this week. The only activity besides attending class tonight is to participate in the discussion activity, which I've simply made the original due date for Thursday, which is day 4. That sort of mirrors a lot of my online courses, most of my online courses, in the sense that the discussion itself is going to be geared around what some of the readings are covering. And so it gives you some time, 3 or 4 days, to sort of read the material. I know you've got other things going on as well, but you can read it, but it gives you some time to read the material, sort of think about the discussion, and to post an initial reply sometime by day 4. So that's the initial reply to the discussion activity. And then we just ask you to post 2 other replies to somebody else or to myself, because I usually try to get in and get involved in the discussions myself, usually just to sort of clarify and maybe ask additional questions and you know, sort of just to direct the discussions in other directions and whatnot, or to amplify points. So those will be on a weekly basis. Those are with 25 points each, and the lowest of those is going to be dropped from the final score. And I want to emphasize this: the lowest is dropped from the final score. And I wish I could tell everybody to grab a highlighter and highlight that, because last semester we had this where there was this gigantic freak out where everybody in the class, I was putting a 0 for the lowest discussion score for everybody. And everyone was saying, "Why are you putting a 0 for a score that I earned way back in week 1?" And that's basically what it means to drop a score, is to put a 0 for that score. And everybody was just a colossal freak out. They got everybody involved in it. And my dean was asking, "Why are you putting 0s?" And I said, "Well, I'm just dropping a score. I'm not." So, you know, that's what it means to drop the score, is to put a 0. So nobody should freak out when we do that. So, but what it means too is that if you miss a discussion for whatever reason, maybe there's a week you're sick or whatever, then that would be the week that gets dropped. In fact, we don't even drop it; it drops itself if it's a 0. So it's just a way to sort of normalize the scores a bit, and based on the 500-point process. And so the discussion scores altogether then are worth 30% of the grade, which is actually good for you, because 30% of what I think is fairly easily earned credit. I think. I mean, there are some points available for the timeliness of the initial reply, which is by Thursday. And I don't know what other day of the week, whether, because I don't know if they changed your schedule around a little bit, but hopefully by Thursday we'll give you enough time in order to make your initial reply. You know, you could even do it on Monday if you like, Monday before class. Doesn't make any difference at all. And you've got the rest of the week to make 2 additional replies to somebody else in the class. And we just ask that they be substantive. There's a discussion guidelines link under the discussions tab, under coursework discussions, that kind of gives some more detail as to what to talk about there. One of the things that is most problematic in some of the discussion posts is that they tend to get a little bit chatty and conversational, and where somebody will talk about, maybe it'll be a question about, I don't know, banking or whatever, and somebody will say, "Well, I used to work at a bank in Roswell," and then somebody will reply, "Oh, Roswell, my grandparents used to live in Roswell. We used to go to a Dairy Queen," and it's like, you know, it just kind of gets off into that, where that's not really what we're looking for, is the fact that your grandparents lived in Roswell and there was a Dairy Queen and whatnot. But I know how that happens. I get that, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's your initial segue. But give us 3 or 4 sentences that deal with a topic at hand, rather than just simply being more conversational. That's really the big issue there. You're not required to look up any additional sources necessarily. Now, this first week, the discussion activity does ask you to just research a country of your choosing, and you can pick any country other than the United States, and sort of talking about what sort of market system that economy would find itself would fall into and why. So you can pick Canada or Norway or whatever, and make that determination. So you'll do a little bit of research, but I'm not asking you to post any sources or footnotes or citations or anything like that. You don't have to do that. All we're simply really getting at there is just to give a little bit of research into that, because comparative economic systems is really a pretty important element, particularly today when there's so much global economic activity going on. And as we get into talking about how we account for all the economic activity, we'll see that there's just a tremendous amount of flows of goods and services and labor and money and technology and information that go across borders. And so it really is an important part of our lives. And in fact, I think in business schools today, this focus on the international dimension has never been more important. And it only gets more important every year as we become more integrated worldwide. And so, which is, I think, one of the reasons why there's such a swift condemnation of Russia for its actions in Ukraine, is the sense that it's sort of the last country in the world that it feels like it's got to go around dominating its neighbors. And so the reaction was very, very swift, because this is not the way the world is moving. I mean, frankly, this idea of domination of other countries. And so, and I don't want to get off into politics here, but I'm just simply saying it was very, very swift, almost unanimous. And I think it's one of the reasons why, is because we're so integrated. We're all familiar, we all know what's going on, and we're all familiar with what's happening on a worldwide basis. So, and that's, we're going to make the case that's a good thing. So as to the discussions, that's what you're going to want to do, to sort of post to the initial discussion sometime before Thursday, and then 2 others by the end of Sunday. The course week runs from Monday to Sunday. So day 1 is Monday, weekday 7 is Sunday. And so by Thursday is hopefully fine. I know Thursday is not the day before the class day. So I know that's a little bit, if that's a little bit goofy and you think that's going to mess up your life, let me know. We'll figure out what to do on that. Hopefully the Sunday for quizzes and exams should not be out of order, but I tried to push that back as much as possible to give you some leeway to work on those. As to exams, they're usually about 50 questions, usually multiple choice, usually have about 2 hours to work on it. As we get to the first exam, I'll talk more about it, so you know what's going to be on it. And then with the quizzes, they're usually about 10 questions, usually multiple choice. There may be a true false component of it as well, but usually about 10 questions. There's a 30-minute time limit, but they're unlimited. You can take those any number of times you want. The last cohort that just graduated before you, I think we had people taking quizzes. I think we had somebody, I think it was the record. It was like 42 times somebody took a quiz. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know how much time that took to do that. It was almost, you got to have the idea there was a lot of guessing going on there, but it was like 42 or 47, some incredible number of times, but which is fine. The system will let you do that. That's not a problem if you want to do that. So feel free to take those as many times as you like, in order before you get the score that you are satisfied with. Okay. Okay, so that's all the grade components. I think I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to talk about on that. I don't want to spend all day talking about that. If there is any kind of a makeup, let me know. Just we'll work on it individually. I know this is your last block before you're done, and I forget what day our graduation celebration is going to be on. But I know that's already been scheduled, so you guys you got to get through this and whatever else I know, and so and then you'll be all done. That's always great. It's always a lot of fun to go to that. So in attendance, you know what the attendance requirements are for this particular program, so I won't go through that with you. There's some boilerplate language in there with regard to things like I don't know, technology requirements and whatnot. Hopefully everyone's over that. So again, this is not something that's overly necessary to talk about. The grading scale may be a bit different than what you're familiar. The econ department falls in the School of Chess, which is the School of Communications, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Our grading scale is a little bit, just slightly different than business school. We're going to be going over the business school in the fall, so it'll be more like that then. But it's a little bit different. It's a little, I guess, a little more generous. But that is the grading scale. It's basically 90 to 100, 80 to 90, is it 90-100A, 80-89B, etc. And then there's some elements regarding the etiquette policy and all that. So you can feel free to read that on your own. So, okay. And then, so for tonight, let's look at the syllabus real quickly here. We're going to cover the first couple of chapters and also the chapter 1 appendix. The chapter 1 appendix is really a math piece. And I take about, and I'll probably get into the material of that toward the very, very end of the class session. And the reason why is because what it really is sort of a math refresher. It's sort of a, because I realize that people come to this course with all kinds of different math skills. And if you're a math whiz, then you might think, well, this is really boring. And in which case, since it's the very end of the class period, you know, it might be okay for you just to kind of say, I want to check out because I've got this. I know about linear functions and slopes and all that. So, but not everyone is all that confident, and I don't want to make any assumptions because I really don't know, frankly, what the level of math skills are that people bring to the class. I do know, though, having done this for quite a while, that there are a lot of people who have lots of math anxiety. So I think there are two objectives that I'm trying to accomplish with that math discussion in the chapter 1 appendix. Number one, to sort of introduce the sort of math tools that we'll be using in the class, which frankly are not all that complex. You've seen them all before. You've probably been working with a lot of them in classes up to this point anyway. But maybe more importantly is to sort of set the outer limit of what's not covered. Because I know I've had students, in fact, I had a student who was ready to drop a class like in the first week because she said, I don't really know that much about calculus. And I said, well, there's no calculus in this course, none whatsoever. We barely get into algebra even. So there is no calculus. If you go on to take 300 and 400 level math and higher, yes, there's clearly calculus, but that's not what we're doing here. So you don't have to worry about that. And so if for no other reason, maybe seeking to alleviate the anxiety is an objective of this course as well. So I'm just going to go over some of the material from that. It won't be word for word. And if you feel like if you're scanning that, if you're reading ahead of the book, you're reading that chapter 1 appendix, you think, okay, I got it, then that's fine. Okay, so you don't need that, that's not for you. But if you need that little bit of a jump start or a little bit of a refresher, it's there for you. Feel free to use that. It might behoove you to do so. Okay. With regard to chapters 1 and 2, I'm going to be sort of weaving in and out of both of those chapters in terms of topics. I'll be covering material from both of those. So it's basically just because the materials I covered here are topics that I've covered for a long time, and it's sort of in an order which I think is probably most conducive to what we're doing here. So I'm going to try to, let me see here. I'm trying to get a little bit tighter focus on this one board here. So hopefully everybody can see this a little bit better. And if I leave the screen here a minute, it's only because I'm just trying to adjust what I'm doing over here and get going. So for tonight, we're going to be covering chapters 1, chapter 2. And next week, we will get into demand and supply. I don't think we'll get there tonight. And then those first 3 chapters, so about halfway through that class period next time, we'll be through all of the material that would be considered unique to, or not unique to macro, but would work for any econ course at all, whether it's micro or macro either one. And I'm actually trying to pull up here the, let me see here. There we go. So it's the material that I'm going to cover in that. You would also have if you took a micro course. So if you've taken a micro course before, you will have seen some of the content tonight and some of the content from next week, chapter 3, dealing with demand and supply. But then we'll be segueing into material in chapter 6, which is really all macro, and it's going to be all macro all the time from there out. And we'll only be dealing with topics in macro, and I'll talk about what some of the differences are between those 2 particular branches of study. Okay, and let me see. I think the final thing is maybe just to talk about dates and whatnot. So I will have the first quiz up and running here probably early next week, and that'll be available for you all next week to take up through Sunday night. So that should be available. So quiz 1 will be available. So the only thing you're going to be doing this week is reading, making sure you're well, attending tonight, reading the textbook chapters. You may even want to get a bit of a jump start reading ahead if you can. I know there's a lot of reading in the classes. But the number of chapters is, I've actually cut down the number of chapters for this course, for the 7-week course, from what we do in 15 weeks. It just seems to work a little bit better. There are a couple chapters that I cut out of that deliberately. The next week we'll have chapters 3 and 6 and the first quiz. We'll have next 2 weeks, and then we'll have quizzes. Our first exam will be week 4, and the second exam will be week 7, and we'll have quizzes in the intermediate time in between that. So also, I know that one final thing I'll address here before I get into the content is that I know in the last cohort group we had a number of students who wanted to work ahead and have all the quizzes available, all the exams available. And it wasn't the last one, it was an earlier one. And it didn't really work out very well, mostly because we had some issues with technology where we had one night where the entire network at CNN was down. We couldn't do a Zoom presentation. Nobody could do anything. There was no email, there was nothing. And, and so I had to come in a couple days later. In fact, I think it was over Thanksgiving that I had to come in and record what I was going to talk about. So, and then push the quiz back on that just because it was just too compressed of a time frame to do that. So it doesn't really work that well. Plus, it's better to hear the material first in class, because econ, I think, is something that's better taught than learned. There are some subjects where I'm convinced that they can't be taught, they have to be learned. I think accounting is one of those. I think you can teach accounting, certainly, but I think it's really more learned. You just have to kind of do it. Econ is maybe sort of similar, but I really think econ has to sort of be taught, and that you have to sort of listen, because reading the textbook sometimes just doesn't give you the full flavor of what's going on. So sometimes, you do benefit from that. Also, we might get out of schedule for whatever reason. And so because of that, the quizzes may not line up with where we actually are covering in the material. So making them available at an earlier date may not even work in the whole schedule. And I'm thinking the fact that we've already lost, 2 or 3 days this semester already due to snow conditions and weather conditions. And those usually were morning shutdowns, but I think at least a couple of them, I think we were out all day. So that could happen. And I have no capacity to do this at home. I've got to do it in the classroom. So that's a consideration as well. So plus the intent of the program from the very beginning was to have everybody work through it, work together, and you all know each other, I think, and can communicate. So if you want to, talk and communicate together, you can feel free to do that. Okay. All right. Gosh, I wish I could hear you. I totally forgot when I booked this room that you guys I can't hear you all. That is my bad. I'm going to have to figure that out. That is really stupid on my part that I didn't remember that. And I should have remembered that because I used to play back these videos. And I really like this room because I'm in this room 4 days a week. And so I asked Rochelle whether I could have this particular room just because it's all set up the way I want it and all that good stuff. But I realized that somebody had messed with the audio, and I don't know, and I just don't know what the heck to do about it. But if you do have a question, let me know by putting something in the chat box. I can certainly get it, and everyone say that they did get the book. Okay, good. And but I will be checking the chats. I'll be checking the chat periodically as we go through the class. And I think there's a way to raise your hand and all that too. But I can't believe I didn't remember that until just now. And that's part of the fun class. Part of the fun thing about doing this class in particular is that I can hear you usually pretty well. And it's not the fact that the microphones don't work. Obviously, you can hear me, but there's something with something that was done over here. I will try to work on that. Maybe I'll even do it as we get to the break. That might be what I do. And as to the break itself, I usually go until about maybe around 7, then we take a break. And it's usually about a 10-minute break, something like that. Gives you a chance to stretch your legs and whatnot. And so I'll probably go until about then. maybe not right on the dot, but something like around that time period. I guess the good news for those of you who are at home is the fact you can obviously get up anytime you want. And not that you couldn't do that here, but you're obviously free to do that. I'm trying to see if we have everybody in the class here, because I know there are 8 of us all together. So, I know your attendance is recorded because it will download to a spreadsheet in Zoom. So I'll be able to capture everyone's attendance from there. So, okay. So, are there any questions for me before we go ahead and get started here? I guess you'd have to put in the chat box since I can't hear you. Gosh, I really feel stupid about that. I think I'm going to call the AV guys at the break. I don't know if they're, well, I don't know if they're still there, actually. They may not be here this late at night. I will deal with that problem. I just don't know what to do about it. And I knew that it was a problem, but I didn't even think about it when I booked this room. So I apologize. And that was a stupid thing on my part. So also, I think everything is up and running in the Brightspace site. The only thing that's not there are those PowerPoints. I don't have any explanation for that. I know that again, as I mentioned earlier, I had filed a request for help from our distance learning people last semester. They couldn't figure it out either. So it comes through as doubling on, if you go into coursework content, and then for that particular week, for like week 1, and you click on the PowerPoint, it looks like all the images are double duplicated. I don't know what that double vision thing is all about. So I'll try to resolve that. I didn't post the other weeks just until we get that figured out. Maybe I just need to set it on a different computer. I don't know. So anyway, we'll go ahead and get started with the class. Unless anybody has any questions for me, we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll go until about 7 o'clock, and then we'll go ahead and take our first break. Okay, so let's talk about econ. Now, everybody comes to this class with all kinds of different experiences, and I don't make any kind of assumptions at all as to whether or not anyone's had econ before. In fact, I know that I'm going to assume that you have not had an econ course before, even if you've had one in high school. And I know I took econ in high school, and I don't think it really was very helpful for econ that I took in college. Because I think the econ course that I took in high school, about the only thing that I remember of it beyond supply and demand, which I do remember that, was we learned how to apply for a job. We learned how to conduct yourself in a job interview, how to buy car insurance. I mean, these are not unimportant things, but they're really not econ. They may be more personal finance or just how to live your life. Maybe just a class on how to conduct your private business affairs in the real world. So it didn't really look very much like academic economics at all. So, even if you had an econ course in high school, unless it was better than mine, which I hope it was, you might not have gotten the full flavor of what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to start from the very beginning and assume that you've never had econ before. I'm going to start from the absolute beginning and say, what is economics? So the question that we've got, and I posed in the PowerPoint presentation, is what is econ? So the answer to that question is it's a social science dealing with conditions of scarcity, choices made under conditions of scarcity and also uncertainty. And we're going to be talking quite a lot about choices throughout this course. And that is, how do we make choices for ourselves as individual actors in the economy? And I'll talk more about who the economic actors are. All of us, in fact, are actors in the economy, but how do we make choices? And given the fact that we're faced with scarce resources, whether it's time, money, limited limitations on our ability to do more than one job at a time, all those kinds of things. If we're a business firm, what's the scarcity we're faced with there? Scarcity of raw materials, or scarcity of labor, or scarcity of money, or whatever. So there's always something that is scarce. If there weren't scarcity, we probably wouldn't have any need for economics. And I'll talk a bit more about scarcity in a second here as it relates to what's called the economizing problem. The key thing is, though, the choices that are being made. Now, in economics, in macro in particular, we talk a lot about choices, and we talk a lot about them from the policy standpoint. And that is, when we talk about economic policy, when we talk about policy in general, in macro, what we're really talking about is is government policy. And whereas in micro, which deals more with economics of business firms and individual households, policy there might be akin to what a business might do or a household might. In macroeconomics, it's almost always government, because government is really the only actor that's indispensable and can handle big macro problems. And so a lot of the issues surrounding policy are issues surrounding government policy and what government can do about them and making choices as to what to do about them. As an example, right now, probably the biggest economic story is that of inflation. And I don't need to tell anybody here that prices are going up, and they're going up dramatically. We've seen this. We're about a 7% clip now on an annualized basis for the inflation rate. In fact, we measure inflation usually at two different levels. The wholesale level through an index that measures wholesale prices and raw materials and agricultural output, mineral output. And that's been actually running even higher than the retail index, which is about 7%. So when I say about 7%, that's at the retail level. And so if you blame businesses for passing those costs along, they're actually trying to pass them on a little bit less than what their own costs are rising in general. So yes, we've got an inflation problem. And what to do about it is the big question. And I know that a lot of us as economists have been saying for quite some time that the government really needs to step on the brakes here, slow things down in order to squeeze the inflation out of the economy. We've been told for past several months by both the Treasury and the Federal Reserve that these are transitory problems, that they're only temporary. Now, just last week, the Federal Reserve Chairman said, okay, maybe we were wrong. And this is something that I think most in the econ profession were saying, yes, I think they were wrong, that inflation is a real problem. And we'll define inflation a bit more concretely as we discuss that particular chapter. But there's no question about the fact that we've got inflation. And so what to do about it? What are the choices that need to be made? In particular, given the fact that there's uncertainty as to what to do. I mean, given the fact that right now there's a big debate in economics as to why there was inflation in the first place. Because the government was telling us that it was mostly due to supply constraints brought on by COVID. That is, there are labor shortages. We can't get the goods moving quickly enough. We might have seen news stories about ships in the ocean that were sort of lined up like ducks in a row out in the Pacific, waiting their turn to be able to dock at Long Beach in California to unload their cargo. And yet there aren't enough longshoremen to handle the freight, there aren't enough truckers to move the freight. All that is contributing to a scarcity of goods, which is driving the price of those goods up, assuming the demand hasn't changed. That was the explanation for it, but there are probably some other explanations as well. And so, but the fact of the matter is that it wasn't completely clear. And one of the things about econ, particularly macroeconomics, is that we have a lot of these automotive metaphors that come up again and again. And that is, the idea is that economic policy, as it relates to the government trying to manage the economy, is like driving a car where you're trying to steer around different obstacles. And yet the only thing you've got to see out of is the rear view mirror. That is, you don't know exactly what's coming in the future. All you can see is what's past. And so you're kind of like, you're in the dark a little bit because you really don't know what's coming. And anybody who says that they know exactly what is going to happen is either a liar or a fool or whatever, because most of us were taken aback by the housing crisis that brought the banks down in 2008, 2009, 2007, 2008. I knew there were problems with housing and mortgage lending, but I for one did not see that coming. So we are all fallible. We're all dealing with uncertainty, and it's a real issue. But as to scarcity itself, I gave you a definition from Webster's and from the dictionary, and it's deficient in quantity or number compared with the demand. And I like that definition because it sort of brings in a couple of different terms that we use a lot in economics: quantity and demand. And that is when something is not there, given the demand for something is scarcity. And I think this is really the heart of economic study, is this idea of scarcity in general. If there were no scarcity, I don't know that we would have any kind of discussion about economics, because what would be the point? If everything that we wanted was available to us in abundance, then I don't know that we would have a need for money or markets or exchange or whatever. And I know that there are some science fiction sort of scenarios that play out whereby everything we want can be whipped up by a computer, kind of like in the Star Trek TV show where they walk into their home and they order a glass of iced tea and Bing, it sort of pops up, or lobster or whatever, and it sort of materializes. If we get to that point, and we may one day, I don't know, I probably won't live that long to see it. But if we get to that point, then there probably would be no need for truckers to haul lobster and for anybody to grow tea, because it can all be whipped up in a computer. So that will change our fundamental relationship to each other, and because of the lack of scarcity. But since there is a lack of scarcity, or since there is scarcity, there is a lack of things, then we have to work through and find solutions to those. And the solution then to the problem of scarcity is the market system. So this brings up then the economizing problem. And this is talked about in your book, and it really is the fundamental problem of economics, and that is the conflict between the unlimited wants of society and the reality of scarce resources. And this is an important thing to talk about in the sense that we are going to talk a lot about the production of goods and services in the economy throughout this class, about a $21–22 trillion economy, and what is it that we're producing. And when we get into talking in chapter 6, I believe it is, which is probably going to be next week or maybe the week after, we're going to be actually sort of delving into the numbers and showing what it is that we're actually producing in this country. And we're going to see that most of what we produce are not necessarily things that we need so much as they are things that we want. The difference between wants and needs, I think, are pretty important. Now, obviously, we could disagree, and honest people could disagree on what's a want, what's a need. Yes, that's true. And certainly when it comes to something like healthcare, it becomes really difficult to say what's a want, what's a need. And in fact, healthcare itself is sort of a special case of a good, because and it's not one thing. Obviously, healthcare includes not just providers of services and whatnot, not just hospitals, but pharmaceuticals and medical products and insurers and and clinicians and outpatient services and therapists. I mean, it just goes, the list goes on and on. And it's about 1/6 of the economy. So about 1/6, one in every $6 is spent somewhere in the healthcare sector, which is just an entire part of the economy. And it's really hard to say that those are wants, actually. Yes, I know there are some optional things that we get, but for the most part, it's difficult to say that most of what we are spending money on is on wants, when 1/6 is on healthcare. But keep in mind that a lot of that's because a lot of the spending is on is sort of skewed toward very, 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 very expensive procedures for very, very sick people. And that most of us, particularly younger and healthier people, most of us have nowhere near that gigantic amount of expenditure personally for healthcare. Not until we get a little bit older, usually. Obviously, people get in accidents and whatnot, but the healthcare spending is a little bit skewed toward the idea that some of the treatments are extremely expensive and they sort of inflate and distort the picture. But back to the idea of wants versus needs, I think you'll see that a lot of what we provide in the economy are more wants-based, which is sort of a good thing if you think about it, because most of our needs are met. And I know that when I say this, that someone's going to say, well, what about the homeless person that you passed and maybe the 4 or 5 homeless people you passed on university heading this way? And yes, I realize that there are people who live in a state of deprivation. And I don't know, what to say about them other than the fact that I'm not sure what can really be done for them in their situation. I mean, the city of Albuquerque has resources available and has had for years. And yes, there are people who live in a state of deprivation like that. And I've got to think there are other things going on there than simply being out of work or out of a home. There are probably some complicating factors, and there are probably all kinds of different complicating factors that make it very difficult to categorize and generalize. And so I wouldn't really want to do that. But if you take the average American today, just take the people living in our society today, even some of the poorest among us probably live better than did some of the Roman emperors of 2,000 years ago. And what I mean by that is the fact that we've got access to healthcare right away. If we're having chest pains, we can call 911 and be on an ambulance within 10 minutes or so. They have air conditioning, we have cable TV, we have all these things. Even those of us who are what we consider low and moderate income live pretty darn well, and we have all the food we want to eat, that sort of thing. But we live better than a lot of the people throughout history, and even some of the people around the world. And if you consider the fact that we live better in this society than maybe 40% of the world's population that lives in abject poverty, then I think we have to sort of make that comparison. So in those cases, needs definitely do dominate the field there. That is, they're really focused more on satisfying their own particular needs. And if you do focus on, in your week one discussion, on one of the developing countries, that might be something to look at. Maybe it might be worthwhile just for your own edification to look at, a very poor country, someplace like Eritrea or Somalia or someplace like that, or Bangladesh, some very poor country, and just to kind of see what the average income is, what the conditions are. I mean, the discussion is geared around what kind of system it is, and so it may be a bit difficult in some of these economies because they're, frankly, the governments aren't very functional, which is part of the problem as well. But it might be worthwhile to do that. But you're free to choose whatever you want to do there. So anyway, it's mostly about solving our wants in the modern world for the most part, and I think that's a good problem to have. And this whole idea of wants versus needs sort of begs the question of have we satisfied society's needs? And I think the answer to that is it depends upon who you ask. Have we mostly satisfied our needs? That is, are we now mostly on to the wants and satisfying the wants so that we're providing things like professional sports and satellite TV and Netflix and and Disney World and all that, as opposed to things like food and shelter and all that. And I think the answer to that really depends upon your perspective and your point of view. But I think that just simply from an objective and measurable standpoint, most of what we produce now are wants, are wants satisfying. Because if you take a look at the breakdown of goods versus services, and we'll talk about this distinction a bit later, probably tonight even, we will see that the fastest growing area of our economy is services, which oftentimes are things that have really not that much connection to an absolute need that will keep us alive. Things like going to getting our hair cut and all kinds of things like going to an accountant, having a will drawn up. Those are all services that don't require any sort of physical output and whatnot. Okay. All right. So questions for me about anything so far as to that? Well, the solution to and I sort of alluded to this a second ago, the solution to this problem of how do we deal with trying to satisfy all of our wants given scarcity, right? We're trying to satisfy all of our wants, but we've got an issue of scarcity of time, scarcity of money, scarcity of resources, scarcity of knowledge, is essentially the market system, which I've sort of further defined as the free market system. And so you might think that I'm sort of championing free markets and capitalism above other economies, and I guess I will plead guilty to that particular charge because I think the evidence is now overwhelming. Even when I first started teaching in 1993, that there was some debate about whether or not capitalism, as wealthy as it could make some, had some rough edges, and so as a result, maybe socialist systems had something to be said for themselves, and that they would at least spread out the wealth, the income of wealth, make everyone a little bit better off, and that there would be nobody living in abject poverty. The problem is that it never did eliminate abject poverty, and socialist systems have never really acquitted themselves and have never really come close to achieving the kind of prosperity that the free market system has done. And am I saying that there aren't problems with free markets and the free market system? No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying there are problems. And we're certainly going to talk about those. And so I'm not a cheerleader saying that there are no problems whatsoever. We're saying that there are problems, but there are just problems that are just natural that we're just going to have to sort of work through. And hopefully we can through legal means and through political means and all those sorts of things. So the free market system, basically also called laissez-faire, and your book gets into this talking about the idea of free markets operating by free individuals that we're free to choose and free to do what we like. And by the way, the term free to choose was sort of coined by the economist Milton Friedman, whom we'll talk a bit more about toward the very end of the course. He was a big fan of freedom and talking about political freedom, and he was probably one of the very few economists to have his own TV show back in the 70s. It was called Free to Choose. And he talked, and it was really in those days, there was still a lot of competing views that maybe socialist systems, that is the sort of command economies, were the way to go. And so he was really fighting some of that at the time. And so, but this is why we get into this discussion in week one, is to sort of make sure that we have, and I'm not trying to direct you one way or the other to try to make a judgment, nor am I trying to convince you of anything, but I'm just simply trying to get us familiar with different systems. A lot of times people will research Cuba, for instance, which is definitely a command economy, and they'll talk about how Cuba's system works. And if you want to produce any kind of output at all, you've got to have certain permits. Even if you want to have something like a restaurant in your home, you've got to have all these permits, and the taxes are outrageous, and the fees and regulations are absolutely ridiculous. And that's definitely a command economy, no question about it. And you know, I'm certainly making the case that those economies don't work as efficiently because they sort of stifle what is sort of the natural impulse of people and organizations to sort of do their own thing. So that's the free market system. And we define a market as simply an organized means by which people exchange value. And so we'll be talking a lot about markets, particularly when we get into chapter 3. And microeconomics deals really with the study of markets. It's probably one of the definitions of that particular branch of econ is that. So we'll certainly be talking about it. We'll be talking about both sides of the market, demand and supply, as we get going throughout the course. And so, and this is sort of a natural segue to where we're going. Does anybody have any questions for me as to anything at this point? Okay. All right. Well, I can see everybody who's got their camera on, but I just can't hear. And I've got the chat window open so I can see if anybody's typed a message. Feel free to, you know, anytime, just write me a little note there, and I'll be able to see it and go from there. Okay. All right. So let's talk about econ. And by the way, if I'm looking over here a lot, it's because this is how I see you and what's going on. Also, my laptop is open over there as well. And it's just sort of the geography of these Zoom rooms is that you know, I've got to sort of be looking over here all the time. So I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to see what's going on. So, okay. All right. So let's talk about the two big branches of econ, micro and macro. And I don't want to spend all that much time on it because it's not terribly critical, but I do want to sort of point out that there are areas that we'll get into from time to time that may sort of verge on micro, and so we'll try not to do that. We'll try to stay strictly on macro, particularly sort of beginning the second half of next class period, because it'll be all macro going from there. But what are the two delineations between micro and macro? One of the best explanations I heard about the differences between micro and macro came from a book that we used to use for a class that I think we still have it here, but it's called Introduction to Economics. It's not a prerequisite for anything, it's just an elective. And it was a textbook that talked about micro as being street level economics. And that was walking along the street, you could see individual businesses selling individual goods and individual prices to individual consumers. The word individual keeps coming up here again and again. And selling within individual markets and hiring and employing individual workers and whatnot. So it's where we live at the moment is in the microeconomic realm, individual markets. And then macro was more the view from outer space, from the space station. We're looking at entire economies, including the global economy. So one was the street level, one was the outer space view, looking down on the whole thing. And so I thought that was a pretty good way of viewing it. Micro deals with this idea of individual items, or what we refer to as slices of the economy. And that is when we talk about microeconomics, what's really interesting about micro, and for those of you who will go on to do some bachelor's program, after this, and a lot of people do. I know a lot of people are already planning ahead. In fact, I know that we've had a lot of people in this associate's program who are looking ahead to do MBAs and excuse me, MBAs and whatnot, which I think is great. No doubt you will cross paths with microeconomics, and one of the things about micro is you've got this ability to zoom in and zoom out, while not zooming out all the way out to outer space, still keeping the focus on individual markets. But the definition of markets will differ depending upon the size of the market that you're looking at. So think about it as like this: you could take the market for shoes in Albuquerque, and that would be a market. Let's say a market for running shoes in Albuquerque would be one particular market. And if that's too broad of a market, maybe you can focus on the market for shoes in Northwest Albuquerque and just focus on the northwest quadrant of the city. And then if that's too, and if you want to get even closer, maybe say north of Eagle Ranch and east of Unser or whatever. I mean, you get the idea. You can get it down to as narrow as you like. It's almost like a Russian doll, if you've ever looked at what those are, where it's like you start with a big doll, you open it up and there's something smaller, there's a smaller doll, and you open that up and there's a smaller doll. It's the same way. It kind of is the idea that you can drill down into individual markets as finely as you want to do. And micro does achieve that. In fact, one of the things that microeconomists have been able to do is working a lot with business firms in doing what's called micro marketing. And that is determining, even in very small areas, geographic areas or demographic areas, what that particular demand side is looking to buy. So for things like grocery stores, maybe a particular grocery store there's a lot of demand for, say, kosher foods. And so as a result, maybe the demand is not being met. So perhaps that should be an item that the supply side might want to provide as a way of sort of meeting that particular demand. It might not work in other markets based upon the demographics and income and all those other characteristics that might constitute, and size of the market, all that might constitute that. So you kind of get the idea. There's that particular sort of thing that all markets are a little bit different in terms of what they need. Also, markets differ in terms of income and what prices are. I know that before I came to CNM, I taught in a graduate program, taught mostly MBA students and I had a group of people who were in management at Home Depot, and they were all doing MBAs, and these were managers of Home Depots, and they were all saying to me, I think I mentioned the one I was going to buy a table saw, and they were all telling me where to go buy the table saw at Home Depot. They wanted me to buy it at Home Depot, naturally, but they told me what store had the cheapest because it was a lower income part of town, and they couldn't achieve the pricing power that they could in a more expensive part of town. So, and sure enough, I went there and it was a little bit cheaper. It wasn't hugely cheaper, but it was a little bit cheaper. And so you get the idea, these individual markets do differ. And so that really differentiates micro from macro in the sense that micro does deal with small, and unless we think that micro is small and therefore insignificant, all we're really talking about is differs from everything that's macro. Okay, so that's what really is going on with that. It's however big or small you want to study, you want to look at it. And so we could really call microeconomics the study of markets, and that is individual markets. So as I mentioned at the outset tonight, we're going to be sort of tracking along here for the first class and a half by talking about material that's common to both micro and macro, just simply so that we get the foundation laid for material that's really common and it's going to be helpful in either class, because I don't have any idea whether or not anyone's had micro before or even macro before. So it doesn't really make any difference. We're going to start from the beginning, assuming that we're starting from scratch. Some of the subfields, labor economics is a big one, industrial organization, which deals with the organization and the concentration of firms within a particular industry. Also, information economics is a big one. I know an economist who did his PhD and then is working in data mining, who is trying to capture data. Every time you go to Smith's, Robinson's, you scan your card, maybe you get 10 cents off of green beans or whatnot. What they're also doing is they're capturing information about you, so they can see that, okay, you buy green beans, you also buy Diet Dr. Pepper. And I don't work in marketing, so I don't know what they do with that, but all this information is collated somehow so they can get an idea of what that particular market looks like. so that they can better provide the goods that people are willing to demand at what prices. And so it gives them an idea of price sensitivity. It also gives them the idea of what quantities are being purchased. And so that it's really an effort at capturing that data. I know we all just know that we're just giving our card or our phone number and we're getting money off. And we are, and it's good, but they're also collecting information about us. And so information economics is a big part of what we're doing right now. Financial economics is my own particular area. I worked in banking for 20 years. And so my career sort of spanned. I was an adjunct, a part-time instructor while I was still working in banking, in fact, very early on in banking. And so I do come from the financial world until I left about 2004 and decided to go back to graduate school and just to do this. And so I do this. I also do have an investment firm as well. So this is what I do for the most part, however. And industrial regulation. We'll talk a bit about regulation a bit later. Let's talk about macro, that big picture view that from the space shuttle. This is what we're going to be focusing on throughout the entire rest of the class. So if you took an econ course before, say, 1930, probably all that you would be getting would be what today we would constitute as micro. In fact, the term macroeconomics didn't even exist until I think sometime in the 1940s. It just didn't even exist as a thing. And it really had to be invented. It had to be invented. Why? Because of the Great Depression that occurred throughout all the 1930s. And the idea was among the people who were doing the theorizing and trying to solve the problems of the Great Depression, the idea was, hey, the ideas that we have about how economies work aren't providing the answers. It's not working. If these ideas were so great, why aren't they solving the problem of the Great Depression? That's a good question. So macro had to be developed as a remedy for those particular problems. And so the idea of macro really sort of developed during the 1930s. And we're going to be talking a bit, particularly toward the end of the class, about the work of the economist John Maynard Keynes and how his work is really critical to our understanding. He's probably the first true macroeconomist who basically said, look, you can't just treat an economy as the sum of its parts. The macroeconomies, there's something more going on there. First of all, you've got an international dimension that you're not even accounting for. You've also got different topics that you need to be looking at as separate items that don't even come up in microeconomics. Things like money supply, interest rates, and tax policy, and government spending, and budgetary matters. All these things are unique to macro. And so as a result, the need for macroeconomics developed as a result of the Great Depression and as a way to solve those particular problems. That the idea was the economy itself was not just a collection of markets, it was a real thing in and of itself. And so when we talk about the study of the entire economy, it also does include the global economy, as I just mentioned. That is the idea of interconnectedness. And we're going to talk about imports and exports a bit. We'll probably get there a little bit tonight. We'll certainly pick that up more next time. But it's a huge part of the economy, and it's getting bigger all the time. Global trade. One of the things that we all know, just living our lives, is the fact that we're all impacted by things that go on around the world. Last night, I was just checking the oil market. I saw that the global spot price of oil is 124 a barrel, almost 125. That is a gigantic, that's about the highest that I think I've ever seen it. And so I did fill my gas tank up. I mean, I didn't need a full tank, but you know, I put as much as I could in, knowing that we're going to have higher gas prices, no question about it. And right now, I think these retailers are reluctant to push it above $3.99 a gallon, but it will probably get there, just given the fact all the uncertainty that's going on with Russia and the fact that Russia produces lots of oil and gas, and our European allies are really wanting to sort of turn off the spigot and in order to sort of starve the Russian economy of resources. And I wish I could tell you what was going to happen with that whole situation, which I know has been dominating the news now for the last week or couple of weeks, I guess. I really don't know what is going to happen there. I really don't. So it's an interesting, it's a very scary thing. But it's something that impacts all of us. We have nothing to do with the price of oil. and we're just living our lives, and nobody's giving us a raise to compensate for that increase in the price of oil. So it just sort of happens. Also, one of the things that just distinguishes micro from macro is the word macro from micro is that we're dealing with very, very large variables. Like when we talk about the total output of the US economy, we're talking about a dollar figure. It looks something like this. It's about $21 trillion, 22 trillion, something like that. It's not rounded to that number, but it's 12 zeros. You could easily live your life without ever having to deal with a number that big, right? It's just a gigantic figure. And if you take the fact that there are about 300 some million Americans, I think it's more like 330 million Americans, something like that, then what do we have per person? Then this comes out to about $70,000 per person of total output. So within the economy in a given year, something like that. So if you think, well, hey, then that must mean that the average income per person, you know, man, woman, and child, etc., retiree, disabled person, incarcerated person, must be about $70,000. And so the average family of four must have an income of about $280,000. Well, we know that is not correct at all. That $280,000 would not be an average family income. But keep in mind, a lot of this share goes to the corporate sector, to businesses, where it's either retained or some of it's passed along to others. Some of it gets sopped up by government, and we will have no end to our conversation about where government fits into that. And then this is a little bit bigger number here, so it's not quite this large of a number. But we're talking about very, very big numbers. And I know that sometimes on the news, they'll talk about some gigantic number in macroeconomics, and the news and the press will just go on and on about, excuse me, I'm sorry, I got a cough, I'm having trouble shaking here. The press will just go on and on about the size of the number, when in fact, it may not be that big in relation to the whole scheme of things, you know. They talked about the idea of increasing aid to Ukraine by $350 million. Now, that was a lot of money. That is not a lot of money when it compares to the overall federal budget. No, you know, not even close to being even 1%. I mean, it's a very small percentage of that. And I know that a lot of times there was criticism of the space program in the 1960s and going to the moon. And as it turns out, the whole moon effort was never more than about 1% of total output of total production in the US economy. And you can make the argument that so many things came out of that, such as things like advances in computing. Integrated circuits were really invented for that. That is, computer chips that obviously now are central to our lives. They were really created in order to be able to handle the needs of that particular program. Things like materials and guidance systems and all that was developed during that period of time. So you could say that the benefits far outweigh the costs, but the costs themselves are fairly modest. And so, but we're talking about big numbers. And so sometimes I think we get a little bit bent out of shape when we see very big numbers. And politicians will like to do this. They'll talk about these gigantic numbers as if they're trying to, you know, scare us and whatnot. But we are a very, very large economy. And one of the things about the US economy is that the US economy is the world's largest. And it's number two. The second place is China. And China is not as big as the United States. Yes, there have been discussions, and I know there's something that, and sometimes people use this as a resource in the week one discussion activity, something called the CIA fact book. I think it's kind of interesting that our intelligence agency has a very public website called the CIA fact book. We can go online and get information about a lot of different countries. It's a really an interesting website, to be honest with you, but we'll talk about different parts of the world and where where countries line up in terms of in terms of their healthcare and life expectancy and all that. And they have been predicting that China will surpass the United States in terms of total output and income sometime around 2030, which is not very far from now. But I don't know where that stands right now. It's been a while since I've seen that. So that might be something, if somebody does China, maybe an area to sort of look at, because we know that China is a complicated question when it comes to how to categorize that economy. It's mostly free market, but yet they've still got an element of political command going on. They've not really relinquished that. So it's an interesting case, China is, no question about it. So, and real quickly, some of the subfields are monetary economics, we're going to talk about all these business cycle studies, trade studies that is dealing. Whenever in economics we use the word trade, we're talking about international trade, that is trade across international boundaries. Those are all individual subfields of study when it comes to macro. Okay, so those are really to sort of let us know what macro is and what macro is not. Okay, and then before we start getting into some of the meat and bones of this particular discussion, we'll talk a little bit about what economists do. It's a very small profession. I think there are only 11,000 professional economists in the U.S., which makes us smaller as an occupation than brain surgeons. And so it's a very small occupation, but there's a lot of job opportunities, no question about it. So what economists do, they're engaged. One of the things about econ that's interesting is that there's so many different opportunities and places to go. There's the obvious case of working colleges and universities. They're doing teaching and doing research, also working in government, or working in business, or working in consulting. These are all opportunities that are available. So economists are sort of this indispensable part of the world of the labor force in terms of providing necessary services to a lot of different characters. Also advising political leaders, particularly those running for political office. We've never had a president of the United States who comes from an econ background. We've had some who come from business backgrounds, but never from an economics background. Even though there was the TV show The West Wing, in which Martin Sheen was the president, he was an economist, and that was a little bit unrealistic because most economists do not have political aspirations. There have been some in the Congress, but not too many. But advising political leaders, we really cannot expect presidents of the United States to have lots and lots of detailed knowledge of what's going on with the economy, because first of all, it changes all the time. And in order to sort of follow econ, much less study it and teach it, we've got to be aware of what's going on. And so it requires constantly keeping up on what the data is. I mean, I'll go on vacation for a week and come back and I'll find things have changed. And I've got to then look back at what is going on here, what has happened in the week that I've been gone, just to kind of keep up on what's going on with oil prices or interest rates or currency values or something that might have changed. And while I wasn't looking, and so we can't expect people who are involved in other things to really be able to keep their eye on it. So giving advice is an important aspect of political leaders. And then the most important thing here really is the creation of statements. And that is, or pronouncements, if you like. And if the word pronouncements is a little bit highfalutin, then maybe statements is a better way of looking at it. And there are really two kinds of economic statements. And these are also discussed in your text. There are what's called positive economic statements and normative economic statements. Okay? Now, what is a positive statement? Let me describe what this is and why it's important and why do we even care about what it is. First of all, it's not necessarily good news, okay? So when we say a positive economic statement, we're not saying that this is a good bit of information that we're sharing with everybody. We're simply saying this is what we know based upon the way we see the world. And it comes from a tradition, excuse me, that comes out of the Enlightenment known as positivism. And positivism is this idea of viewing the world as it is, not as it should be, and without ascribing what has happened to some mystical or supernatural explanations. That is, we're not making things up. So, for example, the ancient Greeks might have believed that thunder was as a result of the gods bowling. Right? They used to think that was what thunder was the gods bowling. And I think most of us today would not even dream of that as an explanation for what thunder is, right? But you get the idea that that was the best knowledge that they had. And so a supernatural explanation. We're saying that the world is, that we're trying to find scientific explanations for things. We're trying to find rational explanations. And we're whether it's good news or bad news, we're trying to provide and talk about the world as it is. So if we say something like the unemployment rate is 8%, then we're not saying that's necessarily good or bad. Excuse me. Man, I'm sorry. We're not saying it's necessarily good or bad. We're just simply saying this is what it is. Oh, excuse me. And then what to do about it becomes a bit more of the second category, and that is of the normative statement there. So a positive economic statement is basically a statement of what is, and it's not necessarily controversial. It's not intended to be, and it's expected to be objective and measurable, and something that we can all pretty much agree on, whether it's good news or bad news or not. The second statement, though, is really where all the trouble begins. That's with normative statements. This is statements of what should be or what ought to happen. So the word "should" here is sort of a tip-off. You're talking about a normative statement. And a normative statement would be something like, if the positive statement is unemployment is 8%, then the normative statement is unemployment should be only 4%, right? And when we talk about the unemployment rate, we'll talk about the fact that there's some sort of what we call natural rate of unemployment that's somewhere between 4 and say 5%, 4 and 6%, 4 and 5%, where there's always going to be some amount of unemployment simply because people are leaving jobs, they're terminated from jobs, their jobs are ending, they're seasonally unemployed, they're moving around, they're graduating, they're doing all kinds of things and whatnot, or they're leaving the workforce voluntarily, or they're whatever. There's always going to be that sort of situation. So the question is, should the unemployment rate be 0? The answer is no. We shouldn't want the unemployment rate to be 0, because that would imply that everybody has to work, and we don't want that sort of situation either, because there's always going to be some unemployment for all kinds of various reasons that we will get into a bit later in the course. But the question is, what is the right amount? Now is 4% the right figure? Is 5%? It's not really clear. I can tell you that when I was an undergraduate, and we were coming off of a pretty deep recession, where the unemployment rate actually got into double digits nationally. I think it was about 10.5, 11% nationally, which is a pretty high unemployment rate. And we got down to about 7. The economy improved. We had growth return, jobs picked up, hiring picked up. The unemployment rate fell to about 7. And it just kind of fell, and it kind of stopped, and was kind of hovering there. And I remember economists in the department where I was at the time a student were saying, well, maybe 7% is the new normal. That is the new natural rate of unemployment. Now, 7% today would not be acceptable, because I think most of us are thinking that between 4 and 5, say let's call it 4.5, to split the difference would be a more realistic rate for the national rate of unemployment. So what's right? 7%, is that right? Is 4.5 right? It's not particularly clear. It's very subjective, and people will differ on what that means. Now, and that's where all the trouble begins, is because of the fact that it is subjective. What I think may not be what you think, maybe not what anyone else thinks. And so as a result, that's where all the trouble begins. But yet, nonetheless, that's where policy is formed. Because when we talk about economic policy, which is basically government policy, we're talking about the idea of taking an idea and say, this should be what things should be. And so whenever government does some economic policy, someone's probably going to find some objection to it somehow. It just is sort of the way of the world. And so if you consider, in fact, I think probably in our lifetimes, the most controversial thing that I could remember from an economic policy recommendation was President Obama's legislation to require everyone to have health insurance. And there were all kinds of people, who were objecting to that and saying it was the beginning of socialism and Nazism and all these other isms and whatnot. And what he was saying was that he was looking at the fact that 47 million Americans did not have health insurance. The positive economic statement was 47 million Americans did not have health insurance for various reasons, not just because they didn't want it or couldn't afford it. That was part of the case too, but because of the fact they couldn't get it because they'd had something like a pre-existing condition like a cancer previously, or a heart condition or diabetes or something. The insurance companies wouldn't insure them. And so a lot of people just didn't have health insurance, which was a drain on our public system, because if you're really, really sick, we will treat people if they have no means to pay, but that's still somebody's got to pay for it. So President Obama was saying, let's keep this a private system and let's make sure that everyone has health insurance. So the positive economic statement, which is not good news at all, which is why positive economic statements should not be construed with good news only. Positive economic statement, 47 million Americans did not have health insurance. The normative statement was all Americans should have health insurance. And so that became the policy, which became the law known as the Affordable Care Act, that required everybody to go get health insurance. Now, I know that law has been sort of whittled down a little bit, particularly the penalties for not complying have been really removed from the tax code because there was a tax penalty that went after that. It was sort of a mosh pit of a law. I won't lie to you there. It was a very complicated law, a lot of different pieces that are still very difficult to understand. But nonetheless, the idea was people should have health insurance and that it would be good for everybody to be able to have it, and the government would help those who are unable to afford it. But that law was extremely controversial. I can't even think about a law that was more, from an economic standpoint, that was more controversial than that one. We had all kinds of charges and counter charges going back and forth about that, and so it was very contentious. But that's what policy is. It does cause a lot of confusion and contention and whatnot. And so the one thing that I can tell you, we're due for a break here in a minute, but the last thing I'll say before we do that is the idea that we don't want to sugarcoat what econ is all about. That we will talk about subjects that are sometimes very controversial, where people may disagree with others. And we fortunately don't get into debates and arguments too much among class members and whatnot. But if you want to do that, I suppose you can. I mean, you're not physically with each other, so it might be a little bit challenging to do that. But your views are certainly welcome. But the point is, though, that there are a lot of things that come up in econ that are controversial, and where the government's doing something that you don't agree with. If they're raising taxes or spending money on this particular program or whatever. Well, we all are in that situation where there's always something that government is doing somewhere that we don't like. And so that's just part of the natural order of things. It does happen. And I bring up government here mostly because macro deals a lot with where government actors fit in, particularly as it relates to policy, because when we talk about the national economy and the global economy, it's really only government actors that can make these enforcement of things on the population. That is to enforce policy on the population. Okay. All right. So this gives us a good segment. This is a good stopping point, actually. So we go from here to talk about production, inputs and outputs and whatnot. Are there questions for me before we take a short break here and do that? Okay. Why don't we take about a 10-minute break until about 10 after? And if you're a little bit late coming back, it's no big deal. It'll give us a chance to stretch a little bit, and then that'll only leave us about an hour and 10 minutes. That'll be easy peasy for us to do, and we'll be done. And if there's anything we don't finish in tonight's class session, we can certainly easily pick up the pieces. One of the things about the Zoom sessions is that since it's all done since the exams are done online, that we've got every class session available to talk about material where there's no class time taken up by taking the exam. You're taking it home or wherever. So unfortunately, since I can't hear you, I'm going to look in the chat box here. So, okay, well, let's take a short break, and I will see you all in a few minutes. Okay, I think we're mostly back, and if we're not all back, we'll all be coming back. Looks like we're all here, right? Just since there are only eight of you, it was pretty easy to just count everybody. So everyone is in attendance tonight, so that's good. So there's no issue as far as that goes. So that's kind of good. Okay, so other questions for me about anything that we talked about in the first half of the class session so far? Okay, well, if you do have questions, I could not get a hold of they're gone for the night. The AV people are, and so I can't get them to fix the audio problems. I will work on that and see what's that. I bet some switch has to be flipped or some button in that I have to click on. I'm sure it's an easy fix, but we will work on that. If not, then I'll have to get a different room, and because this is intended to be a regular class session, just we're not physically in the same setup. But I do these Zoom sessions every day, so it's not. I'm pretty much used to doing them. We do have classes in which we actually record these and post those for everyone's availability. So, okay, so let's do this. We're going to talk a bit about who, what, when, where, and why of economics tonight. And what we don't get done, we'll probably pick up next time. And before we launch into chapter 3, dealing with demand and supply. And so we'll talk a little bit about the sort of the how of economics right now. And that is, if you're going to construct the most basic model of an economy, it's or of a producer. This key function here of production. Production seems to be the linchpin between taking these things that are around us in the environment and sort of manipulating them, putting them together, using labor and inputs and whatnot, and then creating some valuable output. And the output is what we measure in terms of economic activity. But it's all these corralling of these things here that we simply call inputs. And this is obviously not the best flowchart methodology. It's not going to win any Nobel Prizes, but it's sort of corralled by the producer at the level of the business firm. And we'll talk about business firms as being one of the key economic actors when we get to talking about that here shortly. So business firm is the actor that does this. In fact, a lot of the output of goods and services in the economy really is the creation of business firms. And you could say, well, what about individuals? Don't they contribute? Yes, they do. They certainly contribute through labor, which is an input into the production process as well. Labor is supplied to a firm in order to provide the output itself. And even if you're self-employed, then that really makes you a firm then. And so as a result, the firm itself, whether it's small or large, is really the sort of essential actor at creating value. And that value is simply what we know as outputs. And outputs are what we measure in the economy. And so all of these things that we're talking about here, whether it's labor, materials, energy, sunlight, whatever, all these things are brought together, corralled in the production process, and out the door is to create output, which we can put a dollar figure on, we can measure. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do in economics, is trying to measure this creation of output. But we've got to work a little bit backwards here in order to find out where this output comes from and how it's created in the first place. And so economists have long ago categorized this particular assessment of these input factors as being known as the factors of production. And input factors or factors of production, I actually like the term factors because it sort of is as sort of a nod to the mathematical part of this, and that is the idea that 2 plus 7 added together is only 9, but 2 times 7, that is a factor of 2 times 7 is 14, something much larger. And so these elements, when combined together, result in something more valuable than the sum of its parts, which is sort of a metaphor for macroeconomics in general, that we're creating more than the sum of the parts. And so there are 4 categories. These are listed in your PowerPoint package: land, labor, capital. And for the longest time, even going back to really the beginning of industrialization, where there were really only 3: land, labor, and capital. And sometime toward the end of the 20th century, there was a 4th one that was sort of brought to bear here, called entrepreneurial ability or entrepreneurship. And we'll talk about what that is. Some think that might be better situated as a subset of number 2, but it sort of has its own particular place in this listing here. So anyway, let's talk about what these input factors are. Now, keep in mind here that these land, labor, and capital in particular are very old terms. They go back to really the 18th century. So they don't necessarily mean now what they meant then, but they would include some of the things that are included in that original definition. We talked about land in the 18th century. We probably physically just meant land itself. But today, what we're really talking about when we talk about land is essentially natural resources. And that is everything that comes to us by virtue of our being on the same planet together with these particular goods. That is, we don't have to, we don't have to create coal or timber or fish in the ocean. They come to us naturally. And so as a result, these are natural resources. And so, and even though obviously fish in the ocean is not on the land at all, so the definition, the very definition of land here is a bit old school and a little bit outdated in this regard. But land refers to natural resources. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about what are some examples of natural resources that we're talking about in terms of being inputs that are used to be corralled in the production process. Well, we're talking about, and we can go back as far back as we want to go here. In fact, we can even go prehistoric if you like. And anthropologists will talk about the times in which humanity began to redefine some of the existing elements of the environment. That is, when plants no longer became plant life, that is, when plants became crops, growing crops in particular, growing crops. Whether it was for food or for cash crops, growing crops would be an example of a natural resource. We didn't invent cotton or corn or green beans or tobacco, and those are either cash or food crops, but instead they come to us by virtue of our being on the same planet. That is, we were able to harness the value of those in order to use them for our purposes. That is, to make them inputs into other production processes themselves. And then there was a time in which animals simply became more than animals and became known as livestock. And a small subsection of the animal kingdom we have been able to sort of harness and corral in order for our benefit. And the word corral is probably aptly used there. There are many elements of the animal kingdom that we can't do anything with, that they don't work for us, and that they are simply unable to be used for that purpose, like whales and zebras and whatnot. We don't use them for any food or anything like that necessarily. I guess whales we used to hunt down for whale oil, but for the most part, but they're not really treated as livestock. They're more sort of game. So as a result, livestock, growing crops, livestock, also a lot of other things, such as important things that we really didn't, I certainly probably didn't talk very much about in the 18th century, was wind power. And today, you've seen commercials for P&M, and it's talked about the certain percentage of electricity that's created in New Mexico by wind power over the older form of creating electrical power, that is burning of coal. So that's an example of it. So wind is obviously much cleaner. It's considered a renewable resource. Also, the sunlight and solar power are used as important elements of inputs into the production process. And keep in mind, electricity itself and power itself is not is a final output to P&M, but is used as an input for everybody else. If you're a business, you're not in the business of producing electricity. If you're a doctor's office, you're going to turn the lights on, you're going to use electricity, but you're not in the business of providing electricity. You're in the business of using electricity as an input into the production of whatever it is, medical services, that is the output, which is why you're in business, and you're in business to make money. And so as a result, that is an example. But we're going back in the chain of production. You're going to talk about sunlight as being an example. Also things like water and timber and the entire category of minerals, which I know that sometimes people want to single out oil, and oil is important, obviously, but oil and all of its sort of related materials, because a lot of things come from oil. First of all, oil is also created jointly with natural gas in many occasions. So sometimes when firms don't know, when drillers even today don't know what to do with natural gas, they'll just sort of flare it off, because really what they want to do, just let it burn off, is what they want to do is get to the oil, which is more valuable. And so that it seems to be an issue there. Also, when oil was first being created, the oil industry first began, it wasn't to power engines like cars and trucks and whatnot. It was being used to be refined to make kerosene, to light homes and businesses. In fact, gasoline is one of the first byproducts that's created out of the refining process. Refining is basically just cooking oil, just high temperatures, and then it separates into various constituent parts. It's also very dirty, and so it's going to be cleaned up. But gasoline, they didn't know what to do with gasoline because there were no engines. So they just, like the refining centers like Cleveland, they just poured it into the river. And even many 100 years later or so, occasionally somebody would throw a cigarette into the water and the river would catch on fire. And that was many, many years afterwards. But you get the idea of the fact that sometimes these minerals have all kinds of different uses. When we talk about oil, everything made of plastic comes from oil. Oil is also used for cosmetics and things like waxes and all kinds of things like that. But they all come from natural resources. There's a long list of things we can go into this. Okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about labor. Well, labor might sound pretty obvious. That is, it's this physical exertion. Well, today it's probably not so much like that. Today, we would simply refer to this as a term that was coined back, I think, in the 1960s, called human capital. Human capital. What does human capital mean? Well, first of all, we've got to take a little bit of a diversion, because first of all, we got the word capital here, So we've got a bit of a problem because we're talking about human capital, and yet we've got capital as its own category. So what is that we're talking about? So in reality, I think the word capital probably is maybe the term in economics and finance that's the least understood, because it's got so many different uses, and it's used in all kinds of different contexts, whether it's from an accounting concept that a firm has this much in capital, or I'm trying to capitalize on our earnings and do something with it, or whatever. I mean, you get the idea. This firm is being recapitalized, whatever. Well, let's get one definition of capital that is a one size fits all that we can then stretch to include all the uses of capital as it comes about in economics, and that is the term capital is anything which can be used or anything which can be built upon to produce future value. Anything which can be built upon to produce future value. And so that's, and in fact, if you think about the capitalist system that we live in, what is capitalism all about? It's this idea of building and growing capital, that is earning money and then recapitalizing that money, putting it back into work in the business, letting it grow and grow and grow. And in fact, even something like savings, if you're trying to save for retirement or to save for a down payment on a new home or whatever the purpose is, you can see how those earnings will capitalize on each other. It's anything which will be built upon to produce future value. That's the definition of capital, sort of writ large, that is sort of covered to cover all bases. And in fact, one of the, like in football, you might hear about a team that recovers a fumble from another team, and then they can't do anything with the ball when they have it on offense. They've got to punt the ball away, and the announcer will say they failed to capitalize. That is, they failed to produce future value based upon that. So that's sort of a stretch all that fits all definitions. And so because the term capital is so widely used, it really becomes difficult to sort of nail down what it is. So then in this particular context, given the fact that labor probably meant something very specific in the 18th century, that was people physically showing up and doing physical labor and physical exertion. Today, human capital is what? It's basically taking human attributes and building upon those to produce future value for the firm itself. So what are we really talking about when we talk about some examples of human capital? That is what people bring, other than simply showing up for work, because it's one thing to show up, but it's another thing to be able to actually do things. And this is really what, in labor economics, this is really what differentiates wages, is the ability to do things versus not being able to do things. And so we talk about these, we're talking about things like skills. That is the ability to do certain things. And either you can do certain things or you can't do certain things. Also a big one, and it comes up again and again, and it's sort of a catch-22, and that is this idea of experience. This idea of experience. Excuse me. So if firms are looking to hire somebody, oftentimes they'll say experience needed, or 5 years experience, minimum, 10 years, whatever. And what they're really saying is that they're saying that they want somebody to be able to do what it is the job requires because they've done it before. And that's something that is really important, is the sense that you either have experience or you. Now, the interesting thing about experience is that this is one of those things that really can't be taught. And you really can't learn experience. You just have to experience experience. And I know I'm a little double talk there, but it really is an important thing. And that is why business firms value experience sometimes above all else. Even above education, above formal training, is the idea that people have been through certain things and know what to do when certain things happen. I mean, my mom was in the legal profession for a number of years, and toward the end of her career, she sort of focused on estate planning, wills, and things like that. And when she retired, it's a fairly specialized area of the law, and most of the attorneys in her firm do criminal work. She was one of the exceptions, but when she retired, they took up her business and would often call her and say, "Hey, what do we do here? Where do we file this? How do we argue this? What's the precedent for this?" Because they just didn't have the experience, and they just didn't know what to do because they had never seen a particular situation. That's something you just can't teach, is experience. So it's important. And so you really can't blame employers, because they've known that it's sometimes good to have people with experience because it gives them the background, the judgment, they've seen things before, they know what to do, okay? Also things like training, which is usually job specific. And training is usually on the job, but it can be in a formal setting like what we do here at CNM. We do provide training for very specific occupational paths. A lot of it dealing with healthcare, like EMT training and nursing and things like that, but also things like electrical, pipe fitting and whatnot. Training is very, very important. And it differs a little bit from education, which is a little broader, because if you studied something like culinary arts or whatnot, you probably wouldn't be required to take things like English. And I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong about this, but I don't really think so, because I think these are very specifically tailored to a particular occupational specialty. And one of the things I will say that's in CNM's favor is we have lots of these occupational training specialties where we train people to go to work right away. In fact, our coding academy has been boasting the fact that they, was it 12 weeks or something like that? You go through and you get a certificate, and people are getting jobs right away. There's a pretty quick uptake rate and earning really good salaries, really good starting salaries, considering that these people often don't have to have a degree in order to do that. So education is important. And one of the things about education too that's different is that it's this whole idea of getting a degree, and to the point where I think that see, my dad's generation probably was much more concerned about what kind of degree somebody had than what we are today. Excuse me, I was getting over a cold. I had a cold all weekend, so I'm just kind of fighting a little bit here. So I think they were probably a little bit more concerned. Now, obviously, there are parts of the labor market which firms that are hiring, that is, the demand for labor is very specifically requesting somebody with a degree in something that, like education or nursing or accounting or engineering or something that's very tied to the job. But in a lot of cases, if it's management or if it's sales or whatever, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. And in fact, a lot of times business firms like people with sort of a different background, somebody with unusual, like a lot of the tech firms out there, kind of like to see people who've got degrees in things like anthropology and zoology. Things are a little bit different. Just gives them a little bit different take on the world. That's a little bit different than somebody who has only a computer science background, because there are a lot of people with lots and lots of technical skills who may not have the education to go along with it. But whatever education they do have is only a plus to in their favor. And one thing about education is this, that it still does make a big difference. And we wouldn't have people enrolling in college unless it made sense to do so, and it does. In fact, study after study has proven year after year that the value of higher education does translate to higher lifetime earnings. Even if one doesn't graduate, every year that goes by, you're expected to produce more value to employers, which is why lifetime earnings do go up. And also, one thing about education is particularly for those who get degrees, which you all are knocking on the door of getting a degree, and hopefully maybe it's your first degree, is the idea that it shows an employer that you can finish. You can start something and finish it. And I think that is really what differentiates degree holders from non-degree holders. And you can always tell somebody who doesn't have a college degree, because if anybody refers to a college degree as a piece of paper, they don't probably have a college degree, because it takes a lot of work to get one. And for those of us who have degrees, we don't consider them pieces of paper at all. And you will see, and you will join the ranks of those of us with degrees. And nobody refers them as pieces of paper. They are achievements, they're accomplishments that can't be taken away from you. And employers know that. They know that you are able to finish something. And that means something. It really does. Whether your degree is focused on that particular area of work or not, whether it's not in nursing or whatever, or technology, but it may apply. Now, obviously, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are occupations that do require very specific educational backgrounds in things like nursing or engineering. But nonetheless, there's no reason why people can't do double majors. It takes you no longer. You just cut out electives and just get a double major. You can still do that. And I knew people in college who wanted to major in psychology, but also wanted sort of a backup provision, sort of got a degree in finance at the same time. So just in case they didn't get into graduate school in psychology, because you really can't do very much, frankly, with a bachelor's only in psychology. So they kind of went in that direction as well. So you kind of get the idea. Okay, so land, labor. So labor, when we talk about human capital, we're talking about people who bring more to the table than simply themselves, not just showing up, but bringing things with them in order to help them do the job. Okay. Then comes capital. Well, it's this, but it's something very specific. Remember, these are old school terms. And we're talking here about the original meaning of capital, and that is physical productive assets. Physical productive assets. And assets here, you've all now had some accounting, and so as a result, an asset is simply defined as something which is owned and which has future service value. And as a result, that's what an asset is. We're talking about the physical aspect of it. Even here, though, I think that we can, the physical part of this definition is in need of some revision, because I think increasingly we're putting the value of software in capital here, and software does not really have a physical element at all. Whatever physical aspect there is to it is only the incidental evidence of something that exists, but it really exists, you know, sort of in the electronic world, right? Sort of behind the walls of a computer. And so, but so the original term of capital was things like machinery and equipment. That was really what we were talking about here, machinery and equipment. So the physical aspect of this, I think, is a little bit more difficult and a little more problematic. So machinery and equipment, I think the difference between machinery and equipment is that machinery has moving parts and equipment does not. So this would be more things like machines that run and do things and move things and produce, and equipment, things more like tools and implements and things of that nature. So machinery and equipment, just a general area of technology in general, which I realize this is a gigantic category. When we say technology, I mean, it's like we're opening up a whole new realm of discussion, because technology includes lots and lots of different things. It's the area of our economy that's growing the fastest, no question about it. You know, I think that if you were a stock market investor, you know, I would probably, and you were starting out very young. I've got a young son, so I'm going to probably start here very soon. Once he gets a little bit older and is able to understand what's going on, we're going to pick just a number of stocks, just a little tiny investment in companies that look very, very promising. Maybe pick as many as 50 of them, and if even one or two of those pan out to be successful, he should have quite a lot of money by the time he's an adult, and so that'll be a really fun thing to see happen if it's able to pan out. So technology is this idea of, you know, using the implements that we've got in order to produce lots of future value. That's really what capital is in that regard. You can even put software into this as well. Also things like machinery, equipment, vehicles would be included in this, transportation equipment, vehicles, all of this. I'm not talking about your personal vehicle, but rather used in production, okay? So land, labor, capital are the first three categories that were brought to bear in this particular listing. So sometime around the 1990s, I think entrepreneurial ability sort of worked its way into the mix here. And some thought maybe it should be really a subset of number two, labor, because it's got the human element. But instead, I think what happened is there was this feeling that there's some sort of X factor that's going on here with entrepreneurial ability. And so as a result, it's not just simply these things which can be observed, but it's this sort of magical, sort of unknowable thing that is involved with risk. And so entrepreneurial ability is basically this. The definition of entrepreneurial ability is the willingness and ability to assume risk. And the risk here that we're talking about is business risk. And so as a result, you see that, and I think that a lot of times when we think of entrepreneurial ability, we think of entrepreneurs, individual entrepreneurs who are very obvious to us, like Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and whomever, and we think of them individual. But entrepreneurial ability manifests itself not just in the most obvious cases like an Apple or an Amazon, but in all kinds of different abilities. That is, it's the ability to assume business risk. And we get into this a little bit more in micro, where we talk about this idea of trying to overcome what is sort of a natural inclination to avoid risk. In economics and finance, we define risk not as the chance of something bad happening, but it's simply the unknowability of an outcome. It's risk is defined as the variability of an outcome. The more unknowable an outcome is, the riskier it is. There are some outcomes that we're not particularly worried about at all. Like I'm not really worried that the sun won't come up tomorrow. If it doesn't come up, I've got bigger problems than by not showing up for work, right? But I'm not really worried about that. That's not very risky. So if I make an assumption that I'll see you in the morning, I think there's a good chance I will see you in the morning, right? But if something like Dow Chemical will go up by 10% over the next year, I don't know that it will. Maybe I think that it will. Something like that. Then that's a little bit more risky because it's uncertain. So those outcomes are more uncertain. Well, if the unemployment rate should rise by 2% this year because of the Federal Reserve acting on trying to stop inflation, that's a risky proposition, but we don't really know. And so there's the ability to take risk. But what does it mean in this this idea of taking risk in the concept of business? It's this idea of taking on risk and willing to assume it and giving up other things. Now we're going to talk about plenty about this concept of what's known as opportunity cost. And it's going to come up again and again in this course, particularly early on, where it's the value of something that's given up in order to do something else. And if we think about some true entrepreneurs, and we look at these individuals and think, what did they give up in order to pursue what they did? And so Bill Gates basically leaves Harvard to move to Albuquerque to start Microsoft. So I think, why leave the greatest university on earth, arguably, in order to start a business in an industry that really didn't really exist? Pretty risky proposition, but how did it work out for him? And Jeff Bezos was working on Wall Street as a big time investment guy, and then left to go start a online bookseller out of his dad's garage all the way across the country. So, but that obviously worked out for him as well. So you get the idea. Those are some examples of taking on risk, and so it's this X factor that is what is sort of this newest addition to the categories of factors of production. And we'll be talking about these individually, particularly this idea of labor and capital, because it does seem to be a trade-off that exists a lot. And for those of you who may go on to study labor in some form or fashion, you may come across that as oftentimes sort of as a presentation of a conflict between labor and capital. That is, the more labor one employs, the less capital goods, the more capital goods, the less labor is employed, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that little flow chart there and move on. Are there questions for me about anything that we've talked about so far here? Hopefully my voice will hold out for another 40 minutes. Maybe everyone's rooting against me in that regard there, so I'm wanting me to shut up there. But I had a cold. It mostly went away over the weekend, but I'm still sort of struggling a little bit. So, okay. So we talked a little bit about the hows. When we're talking here in this early introductory stage of the class by talking about the who, what, when, where, why of economics. And so we talked a little bit about the hows. Now let's talk a little bit about the who's of economic life and talk about economic actors. And when we talk about economic actors, what we're really saying is that, first of all, why do we call them actors? Well, it's because actors do what? Actors play roles. And one of those roles they're intended to do whatever they're supposed to do, given the particular situation. So think about this. Harrison Ford he's Han Solo in one movie, and he's Indiana Jones in the other, right? It's a different role. So he's the same person who's playing a different role. So you kind of get the idea. Well, the same goes with economic actors. If you're a household, then from 9 to 5, you may go to work and you're a worker / employee. After 5 o'clock, you're a consumer. So as a result, you're the same person, you're just playing a different role. If you're a business firm, you're hiring workers, that's your role as an employer, but you're also producing output. So that's your role as a producer. So our roles change depending upon what we're being asked to do. So we've got really 3 actor groups in the economy, and that they're households, firms, and government. Households, firms, and government. So let's talk about these individually, and we're going to put these together in what's called a circular flow model. You may have seen this before in some incarnation. Maybe not. I think I probably am going to go ahead and recreate it here, hopefully, and hopefully everyone's got that. And if you didn't, I can always give you the input on that. So when we talk about the three attributes, we're talking about households, business, firms, and government. So let's talk about what these are individually. Households are basically comprised of what we call natural persons. That's sort of a legal term for the idea that we're talking about households as people, composed of people as people, not corporations as. The law does recognize certain entities as having a legal personhood like corporations, but we are talking about collections of natural people. There was sort of an effort to sort of redefine households and sort of call these individuals, the idea being that we sort of live our economic lives alone. But then I think, in the idea, particularly given the fact that households were sort of changing their compositions anyway, and so a comparison over time, what we call longitudinal analysis. You took a household from the 1940s or 50s and compared it to a household in the 2020s, we look at quite a lot different. It'd be smaller in terms of numbers. You'd have situations where maybe adults are living together who maybe are not married, whereas they're maybe more likely to have been married. You've got same-sex couples, which are perfectly legal today, which were perfectly not legal back in the 1940s and 50s. So that has changed. The number of children in households has definitely come down. So the idea was that, hey, maybe households, because this changing nature of households, maybe households isn't a thing because we can't take a typical household from 1950 and compare it to a household of 2020. And the idea was maybe we should just talk about individuals. However, that argument sort of lost a little bit of steam once people began thinking, yes, but the idea that households do a lot of things as a collection, regardless of what the relationships are between the people, whatever the generations are or whatever, and particularly in things like housing and healthcare, a lot of these decisions are sort of made collectively. That is, a lot of people are on the same health insurance plan, a lot of people live under the same roof, and so the housing arrangement is the same, and all kinds of other sorts of arrangements are the same as well. So households still remain as a household concept, even recognizing what I just mentioned, the fact that the interesting demographics have the internal demographics of households are changing just a little bit, okay? But it can be as small as one person. So that's what households are, natural persons, okay? And so when we build the circular flow model, we're gonna sort of put one block of this out here, simply the household model, okay? So households are one actor in this model. Now we're gonna refer to as the circular flow model, which is simply a way for us to sort of map economic activity. And it's something that we're going to be building originally tonight, and we're going to sort of add on to throughout the course as the course progresses, as we add bits and pieces. We'll add the international scene, we'll add the financial markets, we'll add government, et cetera, and other functions of government and whatnot, okay? The other category is firms, and here we're talking about firms as business firms that have two main characteristics. Number one, that they're operating on a for-profit basis, and that they are privately owned, so that there's no governmental form of ownership there. For-profit. Now, in saying this, with regard to for-profit and privately owned, especially the privately owned part, there are entities that are sort of difficult to categorize when it comes to this very strict definition of firms. First of all, what we're cutting out of this circular flow model is the entire not-for-profit sector of the economy. And I don't want anybody to think that it's not a significant part of the economy. It is. It's got a major role to play, even though they don't operate on this for-profit capacity. But one of the things that we have sort of learned is that the behavior of not-for-profit entities is very similar to for-profit entities. They're concerned about costs, they're concerned about generating incoming revenues and whatnot, and they often have the same sorts of organizational structures, they adhere to the same laws and whatnot. So if it's the behavior that we're looking at here, then it doesn't really make any difference to sort of differentiate not-for-profit from profit. It's just that they tend to redistribute income rather than create output. It's not that there's not an important role to play, but they're a redistributing role that is the not-for-profit part of the economy in general, okay? Obviously, there are not-for-profits that do things like research and whatnot, which you can make a very strong argument that they do produce value, And no one's arguing they don't produce value, but it's not the sort of tangible, immediate, measurable in terms of national income sort of accounting that we can ascribe to a business firm that produces, lumber and concrete, things like that. Okay, so business firms for profit and privately owned, and also the other thing about this is that there are entities that are difficult to categorize because they sort of straddle the line between public and private. I'm thinking of something like Sandia National Labs. What exactly is Sandia National Labs? Is it government? Not really. Is it private? No, yes, no, not really. It's actually owned by the University of California, or it's managed by the University of California. It's sort of under the auspices of the Department of Energy, but there are a lot of private entities that operate within that, and all of the workers are civilian workers for the most part. So, so it's difficult to really categorize every entity, whether it's Sandia National Labs, Los Alamos National Labs. There are these sort of quasi-governmental entities that exist, but knowing that it's not that critical of a piece, and that even still, their behavior, that is their conduct, that we're looking to map here, would not differ substantially from those that are captured there. Okay. And then the third category here is government. And we talk about government, we've got in this country a federal and state division. By division, we mean it's by the Constitution. So we'll put government in the center here, not because government is the most important, but simply because it's the area that does tie both business firms and households together. And so as a result, we'll put government in the center there. So when we talk about government, we're talking about federal and state, and we will talk plenty about government in this class. In fact, when we talk about the idea that economics in general is at times controversial, a lot of times what makes it controversial is discussions over the role of, centers around the role of government, discussions about that. Also, some of the major theoretical schools of thought are differentiate themselves one from another by their belief in how effective government is or can be versus how effective it is not. Okay, so those are the actors in this group here. So if we put for households and firms together constitute the private sector. And a sector basically is any kind of division of observations that we want to talk about. So it could be arbitrary or it could be meaningful depending upon certain characteristics. And we're going to say these characteristics are meaningful because we're saying in the private sector, households and firms go together in the sense that, number one, they tend to make decisions in their own self-interest, and they tend to make their decisions privately. They don't have to run it by anybody. If you are a household and you want to buy a motorcycle, go buy a motorcycle. You don't have to run it by your neighbors or, go before some government board and get a permit. I mean, you do need a license to drive a motorcycle, but that's just part of the deal. But you don't have to have any, from the economic standpoint, you're free to do it. You don't have to run it by anybody. If you're a maker of motorcycles, you don't want to make motorcycles anymore. You want to make jet skis instead, then make jet skis. You don't have to run that by anybody. You don't have to talk to your competitors or get government's approval. You just simply do it. But you do it in your own particular self-interest. And one of the things that comes up again and again in economics is this idea of self-interest and whether or not that differs from greed and is the same. And I know that I've had, all the years that I was in higher education as a student, I had more than one professor talk about the idea that one way to understand economic actors is to make the assumption that they're all greedy. And I never really liked that definition that they're all greedy. I never was very comfortable with it, and I still am not. In fact, I would rather go with the idea of self-interest because I think people are self-interested, but that doesn't make them greedy because I think greedy sort of verges on willing to do things that will make themselves better, but will intentionally make somebody else worse off. And I don't think that's what self-interest necessarily seeks to do. I think self-interest just is basically saying, I'm doing what's best for my own interest, and everybody else should do the same for theirs, and we'll work it out. If everyone sticks to their own knitting, does their own thing, we should all be better off. That's really what self-interest refers to. Whereas greed is more, I want to get more, and I want to take from that person over there. That sort of thing. I think that's more of what greed is. So this is my own particular point of view, and I I'm not here to enforce my own particular views on people, but I do think it's important to at least be aware of the difference between those. And if you disagree with that particular assessment, that's entirely free to you. But I do think that it's an important question, at least, to ask whether or not greed and self-interest are the same. Because clearly in our profession, economics, there's no particular good answer to that question. And the government and all its appendages will be considered the public sector, where decisions here tend to be made publicly and in the public interest. Okay, in the public interest. And I know that not all the things the government does is made public, and sometimes we don't learn about government decisions until long after they happen, particularly things of a military or law enforcement matter. But those are different. We're talking about an economic realm. Decisions tend to be made publicly. Right now, we are seeing playing out with this big issue of inflation, where we're seeing the Federal Reserve, which is the main actor that is charged with dealing with inflation, really being very public about what they plan to do about it. And what they plan to do is to raise interest rates, probably. And what makes that conversation so interesting is the fact that for years and years, the Federal Reserve, and I know we haven't really talked about them yet, but they're our nation's central bank. For years and years, they were extremely secretive, and they didn't like to talk about what they were doing. And this is up until just a few years ago, where we had chairman of the Federal Reserve who really wouldn't talk about what they were doing, what they were up to, and yet they were in charge of the money supply. And it sort of led a lot of people to think that, hey, this is a very secretive organization, and they're up to no good, that sort of thing. So you kind of get the idea as to what people had in their mind. So anyway, public sector, private sector. All we're really talking about here is simply dividing them based upon the different purposes that they have in mind, differences in motivations. And all sectors are simply divisions of observations or groupings. And in this case, they could be arbitrary or non-arbitrary. We're saying these are non-arbitrary because of the characteristics that we've laid out that delineate those two sectors, one from the other. Okay, so questions for me about any of this? Okay, well, one final thing on circular flow. Now I'll wrap this up. And then what I think I'll probably do is talk a little bit about the chapter 1 appendix, so that for those of you who feel like you're pretty strong in math, can sort of check out if you want. I have no problem with that. If you feel like you're strong in math, if you don't, hang in there. It doesn't matter. I suspect anyway that a lot of times people log in, turn their camera off, and go do something else. I think that probably does happen. I know nobody in this room would admit to doing that, but so I have no way of tracking it, nor am I interested in doing that. But it does lend itself to that particular kind of thing. So anyway, so let's talk about the circular flow model. The circular flow model is basically the diagrammatic picture of how an economy looks, how it works. This is a very simple model. I'll be building on it as we go throughout the course. One of the things about the circular flow model that's interesting is if you were to go onto to just open a browser on a website and Google or whatever the term circular flow model, you'll learn to have millions and millions of hits, and they'll all look maybe a little bit different. We have these boxes in different locations and different arrows. It's because of different focuses and different emphases that are being placed. And I'm going to try to give you as slimmed down edition as possible. And as we get going throughout the class, we'll add a bit of complexity to it, just in order to sort of make this a bit more, realistic and meaningful. So anyway, let's talk about the relationships between actors. And if actors do different things like play different roles, then what are those different roles? And so, well, the probably most basic role that's played is the transfer of goods from firms to households. Transfer of firms of goods to households. And as a result of this, households take up about 2/3 of all output in the economy. A lot of times people don't really realize that it's about 68–69% of total output in the economy is purchased by consumers. I do think there's sort of a tendency to think at times that the economy is dominated by giant corporations. And that's probably true, but in terms of total demand for goods in the economy, more than 2/3 is that from households. And so there is a desire to make sure that households are looked after and make sure the demand continues to be robust. And so that's one element of it. And the other element transfer here is this, and that is the providing of labor from households to firms. And so this red arrow here is what we would call the physical flow. The physical flow, which itself is sort of an old school term that may not really be that descriptive of how the economy works today. Because particularly we talk about, well, both of these, when we talk about goods, a lot of goods, and by the way, the term goods, we're going to sort of get into this probably more next week when we talk about goods versus services. Services tend not to have a physical nature, whereas goods do, that is, they're inventoriable. You can drop on your foot and whatnot, whereas services, you can't drop a haircut on your foot or whatever, something like that. But you get the idea. But goods is oftentimes, when it's used alone, is euphemism for goods and services both. And so services don't have a physical characteristic. So the idea of including that in some sort of physical flow is a little bit outdated, but nonetheless, we'll go along with it. And likewise, labor is no longer from the original definition of going to work and physically showing up and providing physical exertion, shoveling coal or digging ditches or whatever. And yes, there are still occupations that are very strenuous physically, but a lot, in fact, increasingly more are not, that require more knowledge and less physical exertion. And even the idea of showing up to work, even since COVID, has become more problematic. Nobody here has showed up to attend class. And the only reason I've showed up is because I can't do this from home because I don't have a camera or set up, and you wouldn't want me with my kids running around to do that at home anyway. So you get the idea that labor is no longer as physical as what it used to be. Even location is not as critically important. And in fact, one big question in the workforce now is the idea of what's going to happen to labor, because people aren't going to want to go back to the office, it looks like, particularly once businesses have found that a lot of people can work successfully from home. And in fact, a lot of workers have reported that they're more productive at home, which seems counterintuitive because you've got, things like the television that you want to watch this show real fast, and the telephone rings, and the mailman comes, and hey, what we eat in the mail and all that. But in fact, you get those sort of distractions at work. There's no commute, and whatnot. There's no traffic and all that good stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not more people are going to work from home. I tend to think that's going to be more of a thing as we go forward. So the physical flow, even though if the term is a little bit outdated, then we use a term that was sort of rejuvenated back during the last recession, where we had a real financial crisis, and we used to differentiate the flow of goods and labor as being the so-called real economy, the quote-unquote real economy. And that was, these are things that can be observable, whereas the money flows are something a little bit different, okay? Excuse me. All right, so what about these? So you got this sort of counterclockwise movement here of goods and labor in the physical flow. Well, we know they're going to be reciprocated where the money flows. So the green arrow, green for money here, with the idea that people have to spend money in order to buy goods. And so there's a dollar expenditure here. And we know that labor is not provided for free. And as a result, people expect to earn wages. That's a money wage. It's denoted in dollars. So as a result, this green arrow here, this outside ring, which exactly reverses the inside ring, which is the physical flow, is what we would call the financial flow. Or if you want a more slang term, we would simply call that the money economy. And money is simply a way, we'll talk more about money as money a little bit later in the course, and we give some definitions of money. We talk about what it's backed by, what it represents, and all that, and how it's managed and all. For right now, but we can say that the value of goods is represented by the spending on those goods. In fact, everywhere in the economic and financial world, in the accounting world even, we're saying, what is the value of any good that somebody buys? It's what somebody's willing to pay for it. And so if somebody's willing to pay, $5 for a six-pack of Diet Pepsi, then it's worth $5, right? That may be a lot for a six-pack of Diet Pepsi. I don't know. It's you get the idea. That's what the value of it is, because someone's willing to pay for it. If someone's willing to pay a baseball player $40 million a year to play baseball, then that must be what that person's wages are worth. That's what is the value of that person's labor. Now, personally, I think that the wages in baseball are sort of Looney Tunes, and for an industry that's probably going down the tubes anyway, frankly, but that's a whole other story, and we shouldn't get started with that. So this is the circular flow model. All we're doing here is sort of introducing these basics of these actors that play different roles. And so here you've got households in the role of consumer, and is the role of consumer when it comes to spending and using goods and services, and in the role of worker, business firms in their role as employer and as their role as producer. So they're both playing different sorts of roles here. And then we talk about government. Well, government does what exactly? We're going to sort of not talk so much about that right now, but we will get to it. One thing that is in common here is, oops, there should be a green arrow here. One thing that we know that both parties of the private sector share in common is that they both pay taxes to government. But it's not a one-way flow. One of the things, though, is we don't really have so much of a red arrow coming out of it, because they don't really produce things so much, even though, I mean, government does produce value, but it's a little bit different. It's what we call public goods. And so it's a distinction that I really don't want to get into right now. But the idea is that we do pay money into government, obviously, but government also pays money back to us in the form of wages, in the form of other things like Social Security, and things like that. And also, government does buy some things. They buy a lot of stuff from the business world, like trucks and filing cabinets and firearms, and you get the idea, paper and copiers and all that. So as a result, government expenditure is an element of that too. So again, we can, this, as I mentioned at the outset, you can get millions of different hits here if you were to Google the term circular flow model, and you really would get all kinds of different hits with different combinations of things, but they all have the same general relationship to one another, which is really the important aspect of this. Okay, so any questions about that? Okay, well, and I'm sort of looking over here. Oh, I think I heard something. Oh, maybe that was something else. Oh, that's my phone beeping. That's me. That's on me. So, okay. I had the glimmer of hope that I could hear something from you all, but I was overly enthusiastic, and I will try to deal with that issue. Actually, I'm back in the same room at 9 in the morning, if you can believe it. So I'm barely going to have time to go home and go to bed, get up in the morning and do it all again. So that's fine. I've been doing this for a while. So, okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Chapter 1 appendix. As I mentioned, I'm covering the first 2 chapters in the text tonight, sort of weaving in and out of the first 2 chapters in no particular order, other than the order that I think is sort of reasonable to talk about these from. And I'll get to the production possibilities model next time. But I did want to talk about the bit dealing with the Chapter 1 appendix and the math bit. So if you feel pretty comfortable on math, and you feel you're pretty good about slopes and graphs and functions and all that, then maybe this isn't for you, and maybe you just want to see what goes on. But at the very minimum, I just do want to sort of to at least define what is not going to be covered. So maybe we can allay some concerns that you may have, if you do have, maybe you don't. Hopefully you don't, about what the math requirements are for this course, because it does come up occasionally, not often, but occasionally. So let's talk about the math as we're going to see it here as it plays out throughout this course. We've probably all seen this guy before, the Cartesian coordinates, where you've got you've got an x-axis and a y-axis, in other words, a horizontal and a vertical axis, and they both run off from some origin. And off to the right here along the horizontal is an increase, up to the up on the vertical is an increase, to the left is a decrease, to the downside is a decrease, depending upon whether it's horizontal or vertical. And then so we know we've got this going on. We also know that we've got ordered pairs. So any kind of point within here, you could pick that out and know that exists as an ordered pair. And an ordered pair, basically, if you would drag that down to its respective coordinates, that would correspond to some x1, y1. So point A here equals x1, y1. Now, what if A, whatever A represents, no longer is A, but now is B? And so now you've got something different going on here where it's no longer the point of observation, whatever it is no longer what it was, but it's now something different. And so now A is now B, and then B corresponds to some x2, y2. So x1, y1 is the ordered pair in point A, and x2, y2 is the ordered pair in point B. Whatever this particular set of observations is, and if we were to sort of link these together, we would have a straight line. So we know that in two-dimensional space, the shortest distance between 2 points in 2 dimensions is this idea of a straight line. And when we talk about this idea of a straight line, we say that it has a mathematical property. And that is, first of all, it's got a functional property. When we talk about functions, what are we really talking about here? Functions are essentially equations, but they're functions that take the form of y equals some f of x. And it means that some y is associated with some x. And what does that mean? I know that a lot of times math textbooks probably don't do a lot of justice to it. I know that when I was a young student, first coming upon the definition of functions, I thought it was the dopiest discussion. They talked about some x, x being thrown into a box and then being germinated and out some y comes. And it's like, well, that didn't make any sense at all to me. And so it didn't do a very good job of it. That's some sort of machine. We throw one variable in, another variable pops out. Instead, what I think is more realistic is to talk about that when we've got a function, we've got an algebraic relationship, an algebraic or mathematical relationship between variables. That's really what is going on with a function. If it's a functional relationship, we mean there's something that's operating here where there's some kind of connection between the two variables, y and x. And in this case, we're saying y is a function of x. That is, x does something and it creates y. And where there's dependency, and this is an important aspect of where we're going to be going a lot in macro, where there's dependency, we're saying that y is a dependent variable. And y doesn't really do anything at all. It just simply reacts to whatever x does, x being the independent variable. That the x is the variable that does things, and y is the scoreboard. So think about this, in a football game, x is the football player who scores a touchdown, and y is the scoreboard that goes up by 6 points. It's not the other way around. Scoreboard doesn't go up by 6, and then the guy decides, oh, now I need to score a touchdown. It doesn't work that way out. So the functional relationship here, as it relates to dependency, is the idea that one thing depends on the other. Now, not all functions have dependency. We should be aware of that not all functions have dependency. But in economics, a lot of them do. A lot of these functions do have dependency. And that is that if there's an independent variable, that the dependent variable simply relies upon what goes on. So for instance, in something like this, let's say the dependent variable is wages. And wages is a function of hours worked, right? And if in fact hours worked goes up, we would expect wages to go up, right? That sort of thing. So wages is a function of hours worked. But guess what? Also, wages are a function of another function here. Wages are a function of time off. So the more time off, the lower wages become. And in fact, that's what we've sort of got going on here. Maybe X is time off. We've got more time off, and so now we've got lower wages. And this is an element of dependency, and one is affecting one thing here in a negative sort of way. And that's really an important characteristic. And by the way, it's going to lead us into our discussion of chapter 3 as we get there. But I did want to sort of address this toward the end of the class session tonight. So there is this dependency aspect. In macroeconomics, we'll talk a lot about this idea of Y being the scoreboard for everything that goes on in the macroeconomy, such as the entire realm of all the value of all output that's being produced, which is simply a scoreboard figure. It doesn't do anything, it just simply reflects what's going on. But it is a variable because it will change as the action on the field changes, the action on the field being the actions and activity of all of us as actors in the economy. I think it's snowing out there, isn't it? Is it snowing outside? Oh my God, I'm just looking out my window here. It looks like it's coming down, like it's either raining or snowing. I can't tell which it is. So anyway, well, I guess maybe it's raining. I didn't bring an umbrella, so I guess I'll get drenched going in the car. No, that looks like snow to me. Anyway, well, a little bit, sorry about that, a little bit of freak out on my part. So something is coming down I didn't expect to see happen, but anyway, that's all right. We'll get through it. So there's a functional relationship between variables, and that's the important thing for us to talk about. Now, in this particular case, we've got these ordered pairs that are connected here by a straight line. So we're saying there's a linear relationship between them. But whatever the relationship is, whether it's a curve or a straight line is simply a kind of a curve that doesn't have any differentiation in its slope. And I'll get to the slope aspect of this in just a minute. One of the definitions that I liked of functions was this idea of what's called the high school prom test. That I thought was very good because, you know, like I told you, when I think I was in grade school when we first came upon functions, and we had this function machine and we threw a variable in and one came out. I never really got that, just never didn't hit home with me. Not that the high school prom example would have been grade school, but at least I think we could all agree that when we talk about the high school prom, we're talking about one unique female goes with one unique male, one unique female, one unique male. And I realize that today it's not quite the same because we've now got much more relaxed attitudes as to genders going to the school prom. I don't want to get into the politics of it. I'm simply using it as an example to try to illustrate what's going on in terms of matching up one unique value with one other unique value. And that is the idea that we don't have two unique values that line up with two, because we don't have two girls with one boy or whatever. It's simply the idea of one unique value. In other words, it would fail what's called the vertical line test. Because here you might have one x, we'll call x sub a, and any number of different y values that all will correspond to a, or to this particular x. That would not be a function. A vertical line does not pass the vertical line test because you've got multiple values of x, multiple values of y that would all correspond to x. They could all be ordered pairs with the identical x value. So that does not count. That would not be a functional relationship. A functional relationship would be this idea of one unique x to one unique y. And that's what's really important. Also in economics, we say that we don't like sharp edges on our curve. If we have curves that look like this, we'll see a lot of curves look like this and like this and like this and whatnot. But if we get a curve that goes like that, we don't like that very much. That is problematic. It's what we call an ill-behaved function. We don't really like those very much because they're hard to work with. They usually mean there's something has happened here and that we've really got to sort of figure out what the heck is going on. But instead, we've got this nice little relationship here where, by the way, we've got the very generic format of, which is still this in the functional format of y equals f of x. We've got a unique y and a unique x, y equals mx plus b. So for every unique y, we've got some unique x. Every unique y, have some unique x. All the way along the domain here of whatever constitutes this particular function. Okay, so we know what the x's are, we know what the y's are. We know what the b here would be the intercept if it does cross the vertical intercept. If it doesn't, then it just goes away. Right, it's a zero. So if it's a zero, we can just drop it off. But the most interesting part of this is the m value here, which is obviously the slope. The slope, and the slope is basically defined as the rate of change in one variable in relation to another variable. And the variable in question here is almost always going to be y in this case. So the rate of change of one variable, y, in relation to the change in another variable. So slopes matter, okay? Another variable, I'm sorry, this is, I don't know if I have this written down anywhere on the PowerPoints, but the rate of change of one variable in relation to that of another variable. So x and y in this particular case. The rate of change, and slopes do make a difference, and the size of the slopes make a difference too, because they tell us a lot of things in economics about what is happening. They tell us for instance, it gives us an idea of the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness of a policy. if we can track the functional relationship between a policy action, government spending, right? We spend X dollars on something like aftercare for students, for grade school students, and we want to sort of get measurable results, and we're not really able to track the functional relationship. Maybe there is no functional relationship. In fact, I think there's a criticism of a lot of government programs is that it becomes difficult to measure, and that a lot of people sort of push back on, particularly a lot of social spending, where it's really difficult to get something concrete like a measurable dollar value, particularly as it involves children, because we don't a lot of times see those paybacks for a very long time. And so there's always a lot of discussion about, how we measure the effectiveness of social spending by government. So it's difficult. So, but nonetheless, the idea of rates of change are important. And when we talk about the slope, what we're talking about here is what we use the Greek delta symbol, delta y over delta x, which is used pretty much everywhere in any kind of the disciplines that use mathematics. And the delta symbol, the little triangle here, is simply this. It's simply the new minus old. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And that is all that it is. All you're doing is plugging in those values, and the math becomes very simple. And if the m happens to be a negative m, then the function is downward sloping. Function is downward sloping. And if m is a positive m, it is upward sloping. Even if it's a curve, and how do we measure? Oops, I misspelled upward. How do we measure a curve? We simply do it by taking the slope of the line tangent to that curve at whatever point that we're looking to track. I mean, a curve differentiates from a straight line in the sense that the slope changes at various points. And so whatever point we want to choose, the slope is going to change. And we know that point by taking the slope of the line tangent to it at that point. And we can do that in calculus very, very easily, but we won't be doing that here. So a negative slope is downward sloping, a positive slope is upward sloping. By the way, when we get to demand and supply next time, we're going to see downward sloping functions like demand. Demand is downward sloping. And we'll talk more about what that's about. And supply is upward sloping. Demand downward sloping, supply upward sloping. And we will get to that. That'll be where I pick it up. So I just got just a little bit of fragment. It is 8:20, and I know I need to pull the plug on this tonight. So I'll pick up just a little bit on this issue of relationships between variables causing slopes, and how we take this math and apply it to economics. And then I've got just a little bit to cover from my introductory bit here. I'll talk a bit about production possibilities. Then I'll get into demand and supply. And then before we're done with class next time, we will get into talking about how we measure economic activity. Are there questions for me about anything that anyone wants to talk about? Now that I've thoroughly worn everybody out. Okay, well, if you do have questions, feel free to get with me. There are multiple ways to reach me, and so feel free to do that. I am available, and I'm here for you, and I'll be as responsive to you as I possibly can be. And if anybody has any questions, concerns regarding the schedule, the events, the activities, let me know. I'm available. Otherwise, I'll see you all in the discussion activity throughout the week, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.